There are places where instruments forget what they were built to do. Blue Mesa sits in the heart of Petrified Forest National Park, a Badlands formation in northeastern Arizona where ancient trees turned to stone over 200 million years ago. The mesa itself rises in bands of purple, gray, and rust-colored bentonite clay, striations so precise they resemble geological barcodes. The landscape is largely treeless, exposed to constant wind, and offers little shelter from the sun. During the Triassic period, this was a floodplain thick with conifers and ferns. Now it is a place of silence and fossilized wood, visited by thousands each year who walk the paved loop trail and photograph the striped hills without incident. The area has been studied extensively since the park's establishment in 1962. Paleontologists have extracted fossils of phytosaurs and early dinosaurs. Geologists have mapped the sediment layers with precision. The United States Geological Survey has conducted mineral assessments and topographic updates across the region for decades. Blue Mesa is well documented, well understood, and considered geologically stable. There are no known caves beneath it, no volcanic activity, and no metallic deposits significant enough to affect magnetic readings. It is, by all scientific measures, unremarkable in terms of geophysical phenomena. In late August of 1987, a team of 5 geologists from the University of New Mexico arrived at Blue Mesa to conduct a routine stratigraphic survey. They were mapping bentonite exposures for a doctoral thesis on Chinle Formation, clay deposits. The team included Dr. Marcus Aldrich, the faculty supervisor, 2 graduate students named Hannah Pryor and David Okonkwo, and 2 undergraduate assistants, Rebecca Stern and Louis Matsuda. They arrived mid-morning on August 23rd, parked at the Blue Mesa trailhead, and hiked approximately half a mile into the backcountry with surveying equipment, GPS units, and standard Brunton compasses. At 11:45, Pryor noticed her compass needle rotating, not drifting, rotating, a slow, continuous, counterclockwise spin with no settling point. She called Aldrich over. His compass was doing the same. Within minutes, all 5 team members confirmed identical behavior. The needles spun at roughly the same speed, smooth and deliberate, as if following an unseen current. They tested the compasses against each other, against metal tools, against the ground itself. The spinning continued. Aldrich had the team spread out to establish a perimeter. They walked in expanding circles, watching their compasses. At approximately 200 feet from the initial point, the spinning stopped. The needles locked onto magnetic north as expected. When they stepped back toward the center, the spinning resumed. The boundary was consistent. Inside the zone, compasses were useless. Outside, they functioned perfectly. David Okonkwo later told a university review panel that the spinning needles were not the most disturbing part. It was what happened when they tried to navigate within the zone. Even standing still, he said, he began to lose his sense of direction. He could see the sun. He could see the trail markers in the distance. But when asked to point north, he hesitated. When asked to point toward the parking lot, he guessed wrong by nearly 90 degrees. Pryor described it as a creeping disorientation, a feeling that the concept of direction was becoming abstract. Rebecca Stern, the youngest member of the team, said she felt certain she was facing east when she was actually facing south. The confusion was not gradual. It was immediate and totalizing. By early afternoon, Aldrich made the decision to leave. 2 members of the team, Stern and Matsuda, had become visibly distressed. Matsuda reportedly sat down and refused to walk, saying he could not tell which way was forward. Stern began crying, insisting that the horizon looked wrong. Aldrich and Okonkwo tied a rope to both of them and led them out of the zone by following the GPS unit's directional arrow. Once outside the boundary, both students recovered within minutes. Stern described it as waking from a dream where geometry had been rearranged. The team reported the incident to park authorities that evening. Within 48 hours, a National Park Service representative visited the site with Aldrich and confirmed that compasses did, in fact, spin counterclockwise within a defined area. A report was filed. Photographs were taken of the compasses mid-spin. The Park Service contacted the USGS. 3 days later, on August 26th, a USGS geophysicist named Dr. Lorna Quintero arrived with 2 colleagues and an array of equipment including proton precession magnetometers, flux gate sensors, and portable spectrometers. They spent 6 hours at Blue Mesa. Their instruments detected no magnetic anomalies, no subsurface metal, no ionization, no electromagnetic interference. Compasses, when tested, pointed north. The spinning did not recur. Quintero's report, filed on September 2nd, noted that the university team's account was credible and that photographic evidence supported their claims. However, she wrote, conditions at the site during her visit were geophysically normal. She suggested the possibility of a temporary atmospheric phenomenon or equipment malfunction, though she acknowledged that simultaneous malfunction of 5 separate compasses was statistically improbable. Her report recommended continued monitoring, but stopped short of declaring the incident unexplained. No further monitoring occurred. The case was quietly archived. Hannah Pryor returned to Blue Mesa in 1991 while conducting unrelated fieldwork in the park. She brought a compass. At the location where the team had experienced the anomaly, marked by GPS coordinates in her field notes, the compass behaved normally. She walked the area for 2 hours. Nothing unusual occurred. In a personal journal entry later shared with a graduate school colleague, she wrote that the absence of the phenomenon felt worse than its presence. She described the area as too quiet, too still, and noted that she saw no wildlife, no insects, and no birds during her visit, despite it being mid-spring. David Okonkwo declined to return. In a 2013 interview for an independent podcast about unexplained scientific events, he stated that he still remembered the feeling of not knowing which direction he was facing. He said it was not like being lost. It was like the idea of direction had been removed from his mind. He compared it to forgetting a word you have known your entire life. Except the forgotten concept was space itself. Dr. Aldrich retired from the University of New Mexico in 2006. He rarely discussed the Blue Mesa incident publicly, but in a private letter to a former colleague, he mentioned that he had reviewed historical survey records for the area dating back to the 1930s. He found no similar reports. He also noted that the Hopi, whose ancestral lands include regions near petrified forest, have oral traditions about places where the ground forgets the sky. He did not elaborate. The National Park Service has no restricted areas at Blue Mesa. The trail remains open. Thousands of visitors walk through the location each year. No other compass malfunctions have been formally reported, though in 2017, a park ranger named Miguel Herrera mentioned in a staff meeting that he had received multiple complaints from hikers about GPS units losing accuracy near the mesa's northern slope. The complaints were attributed to user error and satellite positioning issues. Blue Mesa continues to erode at a rate of approximately 1 inch per year. The bentonite clay is soft, and rain carves new channels each season. In another 1,000 years, the mesa will be gone, its layers scattered and reformed elsewhere. Whatever happened there in 1987 may have been a momentary alignment of factors science has not yet named. Or it may have been something the land does quietly, in intervals too long for human record-keeping to capture. The compasses in the photographs are still spinning. If you look closely, you can see the needles blurred by motion, small and deliberate, turning the wrong way. Some voices arrive long after the mouth that spoke them has gone silent. Cameron Trading Post sits on the western edge of the Navajo Nation, approximately 50 miles north of Flagstaff, Arizona, where the Little Colorado River carves through high desert plateau. Established in 1916 by Hubert and C.D. Richardson, the trading post served as a vital commerce hub for Navajo families and travelers crossing the remote expanse between Tuba City and the Grand Canyon. By the early 1950s, Cameron had grown into a small settlement with a post office, gas station, and scattered residences. The nearest town of any size was more than 30 miles away. Radio communication was essential. The landscape offered little else in terms of connection. The region is geologically active in subtle ways. The Little Colorado River Gorge creates deep fissures in the earth, and the Coconino Plateau is riddled with limestone caves and underground channels. The area experiences frequent temperature inversions, particularly in winter, which can create unusual atmospheric conditions. Radio propagation in northern Arizona has always been unpredictable. Signals bounce off canyon walls, refract through thermal layers, and sometimes travel farther than they should. Operators in the region learned to expect interference. But what began in October of 1952 was not interference. On October 9th, at approximately 2:20 in the morning, a radio operator named Vernon Colony, stationed at a Bureau of Indian Affairs communication post near Tuba City, received a distress call on the emergency frequency of 121.5 megahertz. The voice was male, measured, and clear. It provided a set of coordinates, stated that assistance was needed, and mentioned Cameron Trading Post by name. The transmission lasted 43 seconds and ended abruptly mid-sentence, as if the speaker had been interrupted or the equipment had failed. Kalani logged the call and immediately attempted to respond. He received no reply. He contacted the Coconino County Sheriff's Office, which dispatched a deputy to Cameron. The deputy arrived 2 hours later and found nothing unusual. No one at the trading post had made a distress call. No emergency had occurred. The coordinates provided in the transmission pointed to a location approximately 8 miles southeast of Cameron, in open desert. A search of that area the following day revealed no structures, no vehicles, and no signs of recent human activity. 72 hours later, on October 12th at 2:20 in the morning, the transmission repeated. Same voice, same coordinates, same 43-second duration. Kalani was on duty again and recorded it this time on a reel-to-reel tape. He noted that the wording was identical to the first transmission. Not similar, identical. Every pause, every inflection, every syllable matched. By the third occurrence on October 15th, other operators had begun monitoring the frequency. A ham radio enthusiast in Winslow named Margaret Delacroix picked up the signal. So did a communications technician at the Flagstaff Weather Bureau named Robert Sung. All reported the same experience: a calm male voice, a distress request, coordinates, and an abrupt cutoff at 43 seconds. Delacroix later described the voice as sounding professional, almost scripted, like someone reading from a prepared statement rather than responding to an active emergency. The broadcasts continued at exact 72-hour intervals through the winter of 1952 and into 1953. Operators began to anticipate them. Some stayed awake specifically to listen. The voice never varied. It never acknowledged attempts to respond. It simply delivered the same message over and over as if trapped in a loop. Robert Sung, the Weather Bureau technician, became obsessed with identifying the source. He was trained in radio direction finding and had access to equipment capable of triangulating signal origins. In January of 1953, he coordinated with 2 other operators to create a triangulation network. During the transmission on January 7th, All three operators took simultaneous bearings. The results placed the signal's origin at a point 8 miles southeast of Cameron, matching the coordinates given in the distress message itself. Sung drove to the location on January 8th with a portable receiver and a colleague from the Weather Bureau named Dr. Eileen Vasquez. They found nothing. No transmitter, no antenna, no power source. The ground was undisturbed red clay and scattered juniper. Sung's receiver picked up the usual background static, but no anomalous signals. He set up a temporary monitoring station and waited for the next scheduled transmission on January 10th. At 2:20 in the morning, the voice returned. Sung's equipment showed no local source. The signal appeared to be arriving from elsewhere, yet triangulation repeatedly placed its origin at that exact spot. Dr. Vasquez, who held a doctorate in atmospheric physics, suggested the possibility of a ducting phenomenon, a condition where radio waves are trapped and guided along atmospheric layers, sometimes traveling hundreds of miles before being reflected back to Earth. But ducting could not explain the precision of the timing or the repetition of the message. It also could not explain why the signal only appeared on one frequency and never drifted or degraded. The Federal Communications Commission was contacted in March of 1953. An investigator named Paul Broussard visited Cameron and interviewed local residents. No one recognized the voice. No one recalled an emergency on or around October 9, 1952. Broussard reviewed transmitter licenses for the region and found no registered stations within 30 miles of the coordinates. He filed a report noting that the transmission was unexplained but did not recommend further action. The case was classified as a propagation anomaly and closed. The broadcast stopped on April 4, 1954. The final transmission occurred at 2:20 in the morning, identical to all previous ones, and then the frequency went silent. No explanation was given. No final message. It simply ended. Vernon Kalani kept copies of the recordings he had made. In a 1978 interview with a local historian, he said he had listened to them hundreds of times. He noted that the speaker's voice had a slight accent he could not place, and that the phrasing of the distress call was oddly formal, as if the speaker were following protocol for a type of emergency that did not exist. Kalani also mentioned that he had once played the recording for a linguistics professor at Northern Arizona University, who suggested the cadence and stress patterns were consistent with someone reading a script under controlled conditions, not someone experiencing genuine distress. Margaret Delacroix, the ham radio operator from Winslow, moved to New Mexico in 1961. Before leaving, she donated her logs and recordings to the Coconino County Historical Society. In her notes, she wrote that she believed the voice was a recording, not a live transmission, and that it had been broadcast automatically by equipment that had somehow remained functional and undetected for 2 years. She did not speculate on who might have built such equipment or why. Robert Sung continued working for the National Weather Service until his retirement in 1986. In a personal letter to a former colleague, written in 1991, he mentioned the Cameron transmissions and stated that he had never encountered another radio phenomenon like it. He also noted that in 1977, he had returned to the coordinates one final time with updated equipment. He found nothing, but he wrote that standing in that spot, at night, he had the distinct sensation that he was waiting for something to speak. The coordinates provided in the distress message, 35.78 degrees north, 111.32 degrees west, correspond to a flat stretch of uninhabited land southwest of Cameron, near the boundary of the Navajo Nation. There are no historical records of structures, homesteads, or incidents at that location. The land has been surveyed multiple times for various purposes, and no subsurface anomalies have been detected. In 2009, a group of amateur radio enthusiasts organized an event called the Cameron Listening Project. They gathered at the original coordinates on the anniversary of the first transmission and monitored the emergency frequency for 72 hours. They heard nothing unusual. One participant, a retired engineer named Thomas Grisham, later wrote on a radio history forum that the silence felt intentional, as if whatever had been speaking had finished and did not need to repeat itself. The recordings made by Vernon Kalani and Margaret Delacroix still exist in archival collections. The voice is calm and steady. It gives coordinates. It requests assistance. It says the name Cameron, and then, at exactly 43 seconds, it stops. No one ever answered. There are things in stone that should not be there. Coal Mine Canyon lies on the southern edge of the Navajo Nation in northern Arizona, roughly 20 miles southeast of Tuba City. The canyon is not well known outside the region. It has no visitor center, no marked trails, and no official designation as a park or monument. Access requires travel along unmarked dirt roads that become impassable during rain. The canyon itself is a slot formation carved into Moenkopi sandstone, a soft red rock deposited during the Triassic period, approximately 240 million years ago. The walls are layered in bands of crimson, rust, and pale orange, striations so regular they resemble masonry. The floor is sandy and uneven, dotted with juniper and sagebrush. In some places, the canyon narrows to less than 10 feet across. In others, it opens into broader chambers where the walls rise nearly 100 feet. The area was used historically by Navajo families for seasonal grazing and as a route between settlements. Coal deposits were discovered in the 1880s, leading to limited mining activity that ceased by the early 1900s. A few abandoned mine shafts remain, their entrances collapsed or filled with debris. Geologically, the canyon is stable but isolated. Cell phone reception is non-existent. Few people visit. Those who do are typically photographers drawn by the light and color of the rock. In May of 1998, a landscape photographer named Laura Pemberton hiked into Coal Mine Canyon with the intention of capturing images during the late afternoon. She entered from the western rim, descending a steep slope into the main channel. At approximately 4:30 in the afternoon, she paused to photograph a section of the north wall where the sunlight created sharp contrasts between shadow and stone. When she reviewed the images later that evening, she noticed something unusual in the background of one frame. Embedded in the canyon wall, roughly 60 feet above the floor, was what appeared to be a circular metal hatch. Pemberton returned to the canyon 2 days later with binoculars. She located the section of wall she had photographed and observed the object through magnification. It looked, she later said, like a rusted steel access hatch, of the kind used in industrial settings, circular, approximately 3 feet in diameter, with what appeared to be bolts or rivets around the perimeter. There was no ladder, no scaffolding, no visible means of reaching it. The rock face beneath it was sheer and smooth. Above it, the wall continued unbroken to the canyon rim. Pemberton shared the photographs with a geology professor at Northern Arizona University named Dr. Raymond Okoro. Okoro was skeptical. He suggested the object might be a stain or discoloration in the rock, a natural feature misinterpreted due to lighting and angle. Pemberton insisted it was metallic. Okoro agreed to visit the site. On June 7, 1998, Okoro and 2 graduate students, Nina Kowalski and Thomas Rivas, accompanied Pemberton to Coal Mine Canyon. They brought cameras, binoculars, and a theodolite for measuring angles and distances. They located the section of wall without difficulty. Through binoculars, all 4 observers confirmed the presence of what appeared to be a metal hatch. Okoro described it in his field notes as resembling an inspection port or utility access, weathered and rust-streaked, with visible bolt heads arranged in a circular pattern. He noted that the object appeared to be flush with the rock surface, neither protruding nor recessed. Kowalski, who had experience in rock climbing, examined the wall for potential roots. There were none. The sandstone was too soft to hold anchors reliably, and the wall offered no natural handholds. Okoro estimated the hatch's position at approximately 58 feet above the canyon floor based on theodolite measurements. He could offer no explanation for how such an object could have been installed at that height, in that location, without leaving evidence of construction or access. The group took multiple photographs from various angles. Kowalski shot several rolls of film with a telephoto lens. Rivas made sketches and measurements. Okoro collected rock samples from the canyon floor beneath the hatch, checking for fragments or debris that might have fallen from above. He found nothing unusual, only the expected sandstone, clay, and wind-blown sand. In his preliminary report, dated June 15th, Okoro stated that the object warranted further investigation, but cautioned against drawing conclusions. He suggested the possibility of a mining-era installation, though he acknowledged that the location and elevation made this implausible. He recommended a climbing expedition to examine the object directly. Funding and permits took time to arrange. It was not until August of 2003 that a formal expedition was organized. By then, Okoro had retired, and the project was led by Dr. Ingrid Sorensen, a geologist specializing in sedimentary formations, and a team of 3 climbers experienced in technical rock work. The climbers were briefed using Pemberton's photographs and Okoro's measurements. They arrived at Coal Mine Canyon on August 19th with ropes, harnesses, and portable anchors designed for soft rock. The lead climber, a man named Jack Forrester, ascended the wall using a combination of bolted anchors and natural features. The sandstone was friable and required careful placement of protection. It took nearly 2 hours to reach the elevation where the hatch had been photographed. Forrester reached the precise coordinates, confirmed by GPS and visual alignment with landmarks visible in the original photos. He found smooth rock, no hatch, no metal, no bolts. The wall was unbroken sandstone, layered and weathered, consistent with the surrounding formation. Forrester tapped the rock with a hammer. It was solid. He scraped the surface with a knife. It was stone, not metal, not paint, not any kind of covering. He called down to Sorensen. She asked him to check again. He did. There was nothing there. Sorensen climbed up herself. She examined the wall closely, running her hands over the surface. She later described it as perfectly ordinary Moenkopi sandstone, slightly porous, warm to the touch from the sun. She took photographs from the wall itself, at the exact position where the hatch should have been. When she descended and reviewed the images on her camera's display, the wall appeared as it had under her hands, featureless stone. The team repeated the climb the following day, with a different climber reaching the same spot. The results were identical. No hatch, no evidence of one ever being there. Dr. Sorensen requested access to the original photographs taken by Pemberton and Okoro's team. She studied them carefully. The hatch was clearly visible in multiple images taken from different angles by different cameras over a span of 5 years. She had the photographs examined by a digital forensics specialist at Arizona State University, Dr. Marcus Hahn, who confirmed they had not been altered or manipulated. The metadata was consistent. The images were authentic. Sorensen published a paper in 2005 in the Journal of Anomalous Geology, a small peer-reviewed publication. In it, she described the Coal Mine Canyon hatch as an unresolved perceptual or photographic phenomenon. She noted that the object appeared consistently in images, but could not be physically verified. She suggested several hypotheses: a form of pareidolia enhanced by specific lighting conditions, a mineral stain that resembled metal only when photographed, or a localized optical effect caused by atmospheric refraction. None of these explanations fully accounted for the consistency and detail of the images. The paper attracted little attention. Coal Mine Canyon remained obscure. Pemberton continued to photograph landscapes but avoided discussing the hatch publicly after receiving skeptical and occasionally hostile responses from online photography communities. Okoro, in a letter to a colleague written shortly before his death in 2009, mentioned that he had shown the photographs to a Navajo elder from Tuba City, who had looked at them for a long time before saying that some doors are not meant to be opened, only seen. In 2012, a hiker named Aaron Delgado visited Coal Mine Canyon and photographed the same section of wall. His images, posted to a hiking forum, showed the hatch. It was identical in appearance and position to the one documented in 1998. Delgado returned to the canyon 3 weeks later with a friend who brought climbing gear. When they reached the wall, there was nothing there. The photographs still exist. The hatch is visible in all of them, round, rusted, bolted, embedded in stone 60 feet above the Wuhum canyon floor. If you trace the outline with your finger on a printed image, you can feel the texture of the photo paper, but not the metal. The hatch is there in the image, but not in the world, and no one has ever explained what it was meant to seal. Light does not always behave the way it should. Tuba City sits in the Navajo Nation of northern Arizona, approximately 80 miles northeast of Flagstaff, in high desert country, where the Moenkopi Plateau gives way to rolling scrubland. The region was traditionally occupied by the Hopi and Navajo peoples for centuries before Mormon settlers arrived in the 1870s, seeking to establish missions and agricultural colonies in what was then considered frontier territory. The town itself was named after Tuvi, a Hopi leader who allowed Mormon families to settle near a natural spring that provided reliable water in an otherwise arid landscape. By 1890, several small Mormon settlements dotted the region, most consisting of fewer than 20 families. These communities were largely self-sufficient, growing crops where irrigation was possible and raising livestock on the sparse grasslands. Communication with larger population centers was infrequent. Many settlements lasted only a few years before drought, isolation, or conflict with indigenous communities led to abandonment. Records from this period are incomplete, scattered across church archives, territorial government files, and family histories that were often written decades after the events they describe. One such settlement, referred to in some documents as Moenkopi Station, and in others simply as the Western Outpost, was established sometime between 1888 and 1890, approximately 12 miles southwest of present-day Tuba City. The exact date of its founding is unclear. What is certain is that in the spring of 1891, a photographer named William Stanhope was hired by the Territorial Surveyor's Office to document Mormon settlements across northern Arizona as part of a land use study. Stanhope traveled by wagon through the region during April and May of 1891, stopping at various communities to photograph buildings, residents, and agricultural efforts. His work was methodical. He used a large format camera and glass plate negatives, standard equipment for the time. On May 14th, he arrived at the Western Outpost. According to his travelogue, which is preserved at the Arizona Historical Society, he spent 2 days there taking a total of 18 photographs. He noted that the settlement consisted of 14 structures, including a meeting house, several homes, a barn, and storage buildings. He estimated the population at approximately 60 people, though he did not record names. Stanhope's photographs from the Western Outpost were developed and filed with the Surveyor's Office in Prescott, Arizona. later that year. They remained in storage until 1957, when they were transferred to the University of Arizona as part of a broader archive of territorial-era materials. It was during cataloging in 1964 that a graduate student named Patricia Whitmore noticed something unusual about the images. In every photograph of the Western Outpost, nothing cast a shadow. The buildings stood in clear sunlight, their walls bright and detailed, but no shadows fell from them. People visible in the images, men, women, children, stood or sat in positions that should have produced distinct shadows on the ground, but the earth around them was uniformly lit. A wagon in one photograph appeared fully illuminated on all sides, as if the sun were shining from multiple directions at once. Livestock in a corral showed the same effect. Even fence posts, which in other photographs from Stanhope's collection cast long, sharp shadows, appeared shadowless in the Western Outpost images. Whitmore brought the anomaly to the attention of her advisor, Dr. Leonard Kurtz, a historian specializing in Mormon settlement patterns. Kurtz examined the plates carefully. He confirmed that the images had not been tampered with. The glass negatives showed no signs of double exposure or chemical alteration. He compared them to other photographs in Stanhope's collection taken during the same trip. Images from settlements near Tuba City, Loup, and Oribe all displayed normal shadow patterns consistent with the time of day and angle of sunlight. Only the Western Outpost photographs were shadowless. Kurtz contacted a colleague in the university's physics department, Dr. Amelia Rousseau, who studied optics and photographic science. Rousseau analyzed the plates using equipment available at the time, including spectrophotometry to measure light distribution across the images. Her findings, summarized in a memo dated October 1964, stated that the photographs showed no evidence of technical error or manipulation. The light distribution was consistent with outdoor photography in direct sunlight, but the absence of shadows violated basic principles of how light interacts with solid objects. She wrote that the effect was impossible under normal circumstances and suggested the possibility of an unknown atmospheric or environmental factor specific to the location. Kurtz attempted to locate the site of the Western Outpost. Stanhope's travel log provided a general direction and distance from Tuba City, but no precise coordinates. Topographic maps from the 1890s were incomplete, and many landmarks had changed over the intervening decades. In the summer of 1965, Kurtz and two graduate students, Alan Rodriguez and Joyce Mburu, drove to the area southwest of Tuba City and began searching for signs of the settlement. They found it on their third day. Approximately 11 miles from Tuba City, along a dry wash that matched terrain features visible in Stanhope's photographs, they located a circular clearing roughly 300 feet in diameter. The ground was hard-packed clay, pale gray in color and completely barren. No grass, no shrubs, no weeds. The surrounding desert supported typical vegetation, sagebrush, juniper, prickly pear, but within the circle, nothing grew. The boundary was sharp, as if drawn with a compass. Rodriguez, who had training in archaeology, walked the perimeter looking for structural remains. He found nothing. No foundation stones, no collapsed walls, no nails or metal fragments. Kurtz noted that the photographs showed 14 buildings constructed of wood and adobe, materials that should have left some trace even after 70 years. Mburu collected soil samples from inside and outside the circle for later analysis. The team photographed the site extensively. In the images they took, their own shadows fell normally on the ground. There was no anomaly. Kurtz returned to the university and compared the terrain features in the clearing to those visible in Stanhope's photographs. The match was conclusive. The Western Outpost had stood in that location, but there was no physical evidence it had ever existed. Soil analysis conducted by the university's geology department showed that the dirt inside the circle had a significantly higher salt content than surrounding areas, consistent with long-term irrigation or repeated flooding, but there was no water source nearby. The nearest spring was more than 3 miles away. The soil also showed no organic material, no decomposed plant matter, no root systems, nothing that would indicate vegetation had ever grown there. Kurtz searched for additional records of the settlement. Church archives in Salt Lake City contained no mention of Moenkopi Station or the Western Outpost. Territorial census data from 1890 and 1892 listed populations for Tuba City and Moenkopi, but did not break down smaller settlements. He found a brief reference in a church elder's journal from 1893, which mentioned that families from the western site had relocated to Moenkopi due to difficulties. The nature of the difficulties was not specified. In 1967, Kurtz published a paper in the Journal of Arizona History titled Photographic Anomalies and Lost Settlements, The Case of the Western Outpost. In it, he presented the photographs, his research, and his inability to explain either the shadowless images or the barren circle. The paper attracted little attention outside academic circles. A few photographers and historians wrote letters suggesting technical explanations: overexposure, lens defects, atmospheric distortion. But none of these accounted for the consistency of the effect across multiple images taken with the same equipment that produced normal results elsewhere. Stanhope's travel log offered no insight. His entries for the Western Outpost were brief and factual. He noted the number of buildings, the cooperation of the residents, and the quality of the light, which he described as exceptionally clear. He made no mention of shadows or anything unusual. He left the settlement on May 16th and continued to his next assignment. In 1981, a Navajo elder named Thomas Yazzie was interviewed by a researcher studying indigenous oral histories of the Tuba City region. Yazzie, who was in his 90s, mentioned that his grandfather had spoken of a place southwest of Tuba City where Mormon families had built homes in the 1890s. His grandfather had called it the place where the sun does not touch the ground. Yazzie said the Navajo had avoided it. When asked why the settlement was abandoned, Yazzie said his grandfather had told him the people left because they could not grow anything, and because their children began to forget what darkness looked like. The circular barren patch remained visible into the 2000s. Satellite imagery from 2007 showed the clearing distinctly, a pale circle against the darker desert. In 2012, a team of botanists from Northern Arizona University attempted to plant native grasses inside the circle as part of a land restoration study. Every plant died within 6 weeks. Soil tests showed no toxins, no contaminants, and adequate moisture. The plants simply stopped growing. The photographs are kept in climate-controlled storage at the University of Arizona. 14 structures, 60 people, animals, wagons, all standing in bright sunlight. The ground beneath them is smooth and featureless, as if the sun had never learned to carve shapes from light. And in the place where they stood, nothing casts a shadow still. Some locations exist only as numbers that refuse to resolve into place. Marble Canyon cuts through the Colorado Plateau in northern Arizona, a deep gorge carved by the Colorado River between Lee's Ferry and the official beginning of Grand Canyon National Park. The canyon walls rise nearly 3,000 feet in places, exposing rock layers that span hundreds of millions of years. Kaibab limestone at the rim, Coconino sandstone below, and Redwall limestone deeper still. The river at the bottom runs cold and fast, fed by releases from Glen Canyon Dam 15 miles upstream. The region is remote, accessible only by river or by unpaved roads that wind through Navajo Nation land and Bureau of Land Management territory. Cell service is non-existent. Radio communication is unreliable due to the depth and orientation of the canyon walls. The area has been surveyed extensively since the late 1800s, when John Wesley Powell led his expeditions down the Colorado River. Modern topographic mapping was completed by the United States Geological Survey between 1950 and 1970, using aerial photography and ground surveys. By 1973, the canyon's geography was considered well documented. There were no significant unmapped features, no hidden tributaries, no geological anomalies that would have escaped detection. On September 11, 1973, a U.S. Air Force training flight departed from Luke Air Force Base near Phoenix, Arizona. The flight consisted of two F-4 Phantom jets conducting low-altitude navigation exercises across northern Arizona. The pilots were Captain Derek Holloway and First Lieutenant Sandra Nguyen in the lead aircraft, and Captain Vincent Marquez and First Lieutenant James O'Sullivan in the wing aircraft. The exercise was routine, part of a training program designed to simulate tactical flight over varied terrain. At approximately 14:30 hours, while flying over Marble Canyon at an altitude of 8,000 feet, Nguyen detected an emergency locator beacon signal on the standard distress frequency of 121.5 megahertz. Emergency locator beacons are battery-powered transmitters designed to activate automatically in the event of an aircraft crash, broadcasting a signal that can be detected by search and rescue teams. The signal Nguyen detected was strong and clear, indicating a relatively recent activation. Nguyen reported the signal to Luke Air Force Base Air Traffic Control and provided the coordinates transmitted by the beacon. The coordinates were 36.51 degrees north, 111.63 degrees west. Air Traffic Control acknowledged the report and contacted the Arizona Department of Public Safety and the Coconino County Sheriff's Office to initiate a search and rescue operation. The two F-4 aircraft circled the area for approximately 20 minutes, attempting to visually locate wreckage or signs of a crash. They saw nothing unusual, only the canyon, the river, and the surrounding desert. Search and rescue teams arrived at the coordinates by helicopter within 2 hours. The location, as plotted on standard topographic maps, corresponded to a section of the canyon's western rim, an area of exposed limestone and sparse juniper vegetation. Ground teams searched the immediate area and found no wreckage, no debris, no parachutes, and no evidence of recent aircraft activity. Helicopter crews searched the canyon floor below the coordinates, accessible only by rappelling or river approach. They found nothing. The emergency beacon signal continued. Search teams could detect it clearly on their receivers, growing stronger as they approached the plotted coordinates, but no physical transmitter could be located. On September 12th, additional teams arrived with specialized direction-finding equipment designed to pinpoint the exact location of radio signals. The equipment triangulated the signal's origin to a point directly beneath the surface coordinates, approximately 200 feet below ground level. Lieutenant Colonel Barbara Sheffield, the search and rescue coordinator, ordered a geological survey of the area. On September 13th, a team from the USGS arrived with ground-penetrating radar and seismic equipment. They scanned the area around the coordinates. The radar showed solid limestone bedrock extending to a depth of over 500 feet, with no voids, no caves, and no anomalies that would suggest the presence of a transmitter or wreckage. The seismic data confirmed the findings. There was nothing beneath the surface except continuous rock. The signal continued. It broadcast at regular intervals, as emergency locator beacons are designed to do, transmitting for approximately 1 second every 50 seconds. The signal strength did not diminish. The frequency did not drift. It behaved exactly as a functioning emergency beacon should, except that it appeared to be originating from inside solid stone. On September 14th, Sheffield contacted the Air Force Technical Applications Center, a specialized unit responsible for monitoring and analyzing signals of strategic or scientific importance. Two engineers, Dr. Raymond Takahashi and specialist Ellen Kowalczyk, flew to the site with additional equipment including spectrum analyzers and high-precision GPS receivers. They confirmed that the signal was a standard emergency locator beacon transmission. They also confirmed the coordinates being broadcast by the beacon. When they plotted those coordinates using standard GPS mapping protocols, the result placed the source 200 feet beneath the surface. Takahashi noted something unusual in his report, filed on September 17th. The coordinates transmitted by the beacon, 36.51 degrees north, 111.63 degrees west, were expressed to 2 decimal places, which provided accuracy to within approximately 1 kilometer. However, when he attempted to refine the coordinates using the beacon's signal strength and direction-finding data, the resulting position could not be accurately plotted. He described it as falling between recognized grid points, as if the location existed in a space that standard mapping systems were not designed to accommodate. He wrote that the coordinates were mathematically valid but geographically impossible. Kowalczyk attempted to explain this in practical terms during a briefing with Sheffield on September 15th. She said that GPS and all coordinate systems are grids imposed on the physical world. The grids are precise, but they are human constructs. Occasionally, she said, signals or readings can indicate positions that do not align cleanly with the grid. She suggested that the beacon might be transmitting corrupted data, or that the signal was being distorted by the canyon's geology in a way that made it appear to be coming from beneath the surface when it was actually located elsewhere. Sheffield authorized an expanded search. Over the next 3 days, teams combed a 10-square-mile area around the coordinates. They searched on foot, by helicopter, and by boat along the river. They found no wreckage, no recent aircraft activity, and no missing hikers or rafters who might have activated a personal locator beacon. The Civil Air Patrol reviewed records of all registered emergency beacons in Arizona and found none assigned to the transmitted coordinates. The Federal Aviation Administration confirmed that no aircraft had been reported missing or overdue in the region. On September 17th, the signal stopped. It ceased transmission at approximately 1100 hours, 6 days after it had first been detected. Sheffield's team was on site at the time, monitoring the frequency. One moment the signal was present, steady and clear. The next moment, silence. There was no gradual fading, no weakening of the signal that would suggest a dying battery. It simply ended. Takahashi and Kowalczyk remained at the site for 2 additional days, monitoring the frequency and conducting follow-up surveys. The signal did not return. They found no physical evidence of a transmitter. In their final report, submitted to the Air Force on September 22nd, they concluded that the signal had been real, that its origin had been anomalous, and that no satisfactory explanation could be determined from available data. They noted that the coordinates transmitted by the beacon did not correspond to any known location within standard geodetic systems. They used the term interstitial space to describe where the signal appeared to have originated, a position that existed mathematically but not physically. The case was officially closed on October 5, 1973. No aircraft was ever determined to be missing. No wreckage was ever found. Sheffield wrote in her final summary that the incident remained unexplained and recommended that the area be flagged for monitoring in the event of future anomalies. No such monitoring was implemented. In 1998, a software engineer named Gregory Pasternak, working on GPS coordinate validation for a commercial mapping application, encountered an error in his code. Certain coordinate pairs, when processed, would return null values. The software could not plot them. Out of curiosity, he tested the coordinates from the 1973 Marble Canyon incident, which he had read about in a declassified Air Force report. His software returned the same error. The coordinates were valid in format but could not be resolved into a mappable location. He described it in a forum post as coordinates that existed on paper but not in space. The canyon is still there. The river still runs. Hikers and rafters pass through the area regularly, unaware that somewhere beneath them, or perhaps not beneath them at all, something once called for help from a place that should not exist. The numbers are still in the file. 36.51 north, 111.63 west. If you enter them into a GPS, the device will pause, calculate, and then place a marker on a map. But if you go to that marker, you will find only stone, sky, and the quiet certainty that the world has edges we were never meant to see. Not all journeys end where the footprints stop. Newspaper Rock sits within the boundaries of Petrified Forest National Park in northeastern Arizona. A vertical sandstone face approximately 15 feet high and 30 feet wide, covered with over 650 petroglyphs created by ancestral Puebloan peoples and other indigenous groups over a span of nearly 2,000 years. The images include human figures, animals, geometric patterns, and symbols whose meanings have been lost to time. The rock face itself is made of dark desert varnish, a coating of manganese and iron oxides that accumulated over millennia, against which the lighter sandstone shows clearly when chipped or carved. The site is protected but accessible, located roughly 2 miles from the park's main road along a maintained trail that sees moderate foot traffic during tourist season. The surrounding landscape is typical of the Painted Desert, low hills of banded sedimentary rock in rust, purple and gray, sparse vegetation consisting mainly of greasewood and snakeweed, and expanses of loose sandy soil that shifts with the wind. The area receives fewer than 10 inches of rain annually. Summer temperatures regularly exceed 100 degrees. Winter nights drop below freezing. The ground holds impressions poorly in most places. Wind erases them within hours, but certain patches of fine silt near the rock can preserve tracks for days if conditions are right. On the morning of June 14, 2008, National Park Service Ranger Michael Ashford was conducting a routine patrol of the Newspaper Rock area when he noticed a set of footprints leading from the main trail toward the petroglyph site. This was not unusual. Visitors occasionally left the designated path, but something about the tracks made him pause. They were bare feet, adult-sized, and they approached the rock face in a perfectly straight line across approximately 40 yards of open ground. What struck Ashford immediately was that the prints appeared to lead away from the rock, not toward it. The deepest impressions, the heel strikes, pointed away from Newspaper Rock, while the toe impressions were shallower and pointed toward it. Ashford followed the trail. It maintained its straight trajectory across the sandy soil, each print evenly spaced at roughly 30 inches apart, consistent with an adult walking at a normal pace. The prints showed no hesitation, no deviation, no scuff marks or drag patterns. At the base of the rock face, the footprints stopped. There was no turnaround, no return path, no indication that the person had walked away from the wall after reaching it. The final print was less than 6 inches from the stone surface. Ashford marked the area with flagging tape and photographed the prints using his park-issued camera. He then contacted the park's chief ranger, Denise Kowalski, and requested a more thorough investigation. Kowalski arrived within the hour, accompanied by Ranger Thomas Vukovich, who had training in tracking and search and rescue operations. Vukovich examined the prints carefully, measuring the depth and shape of each impression with calipers and noting the distribution of pressure across the foot surface. His initial assessment, documented in a field report filed that afternoon, was that the weight distribution was reversed. In normal walking, the heel strikes first and bears the greatest pressure, followed by the ball of the foot and toes during push-off. These prints showed the opposite pattern. The toes bore more weight than the heels. Vukovic stated that this was consistent with someone walking backward, but the stride length, the evenness of spacing, and the straight-line trajectory suggested confidence and deliberate movement, not the tentative steps one would expect from someone moving in reverse across unfamiliar terrain. Kowalski contacted the park's law enforcement division and the Coconino County Medical Examiner's Office. By evening, a forensic anthropologist named Dr. Hiroshi Nakamura had arrived from Flagstaff to examine the site. Nakamura specialized in gait analysis and had consulted on numerous criminal investigations involving footprint evidence. He spent nearly 3 hours at Newspaper Rock on June 15th, documenting the prints, creating plaster casts, and analyzing the biomechanics of the stride pattern. His findings, submitted in a formal report on June 20th, confirmed Vukovic's assessment. The prints showed characteristics consistent with backward locomotion. However, Nakamura noted several anomalies. The stride length was unusually consistent for backward walking, which typically produces irregular spacing due to the difficulty of judging distance without forward vision. The prints also showed no signs of lateral correction, no slight angles or adjustments that would indicate the walker was checking their position relative to their destination. Most significantly, the pressure distribution across the foot suggested not tentative backward steps, but confident, purposeful movement, as if the person had been perfectly aware of the terrain behind them. Nakamura wrote that in his 23 years of forensic analysis, he had never encountered a gait pattern like this. He stated that the walker appeared to have moved backward across 40 yards of uneven ground with the precision of someone following a marked path forward. He could offer no physiological explanation for this level of coordination. Park officials conducted a search of the area to determine if someone was lost or in need of assistance. Rangers checked the visitor log from June 13th and 14th, interviewed campground hosts, and reviewed parking lot records. No one was reported missing. No visitors recalled seeing anyone walking barefoot near Newspaper Rock. Security cameras at the park entrance showed no individuals entering or leaving the park on foot during the relevant time frame. The footprints themselves yielded no DNA evidence. The dry soil and exposure to sun had degraded any biological material. The prints matched no shoes or casts in any law enforcement database. Nakamura estimated the walker's weight at approximately 150 to 170 pounds based on impression depth, and estimated height at 5 feet 6 inches to 5 feet 10 inches based on stride length, but these were ranges too broad to be useful for identification. On June 18th, a cultural resources specialist from the park, Dr. Elena Vargas, examined Newspaper Rock itself to determine if any new marks or disturbances had been made to the petroglyphs. She found none. The rock face was unchanged. However, she noted something unusual during her inspection. The final footprint, the one closest to the wall, aligned almost perfectly with a particular petroglyph, a human figure carved into the stone approximately 4 feet above ground level. The figure was depicted in profile, appearing to walk toward the right edge of the rock panel. If one stood in the location of the final footprint and looked up, the petroglyph was directly in the line of sight. Vargas mentioned this in her report, but did not speculate on its significance. She noted that the petroglyph was estimated to be between 700 and 900 years old, created during the Pueblo III period, and that it was one of several hundred human figures depicted on the rock. Its position and orientation were not unique. The incident was classified as unexplained, but not indicative of criminal activity. The footprints were documented, photographed, and cast. Within a week, wind and foot traffic from other visitors had erased them. Park staff increased patrols of the Newspaper Rock area for the remainder of the summer, but no similar tracks were found, and no individuals were observed behaving unusually near the site. In 2009, Nakamura presented the case at a conference on forensic anthropology in Albuquerque, New Mexico. He showed photographs and gait analysis data to colleagues, many of whom were skeptical that the prints represented genuine backward walking. Some suggested that the person might have walked forward on their toes in a manner that mimicked backward gait patterns, though Nakamura noted this would require extraordinary balance and control. Others proposed that the prints might have been created artificially, pressed into the ground using molds or prosthetics, though no evidence of such tampering was found at the scene. One colleague, Dr. Amelia Broussard, a specialist in prehistoric human behavior, suggested that certain ritual practices among ancestral Puebloan peoples involved walking backward as a symbolic reversal or a method of spiritual approach to sacred sites. She noted that backward movement was sometimes associated with communication with ancestors or with returning to a previous state of existence. However, she acknowledged there was no historical record of such practices being conducted at Newspaper Rock, and no ethnographic evidence that such traditions had been maintained into the modern era. The plaster casts remain in storage at Petrified Forest National Park. They are detailed and precise, showing the whorls and lines of a human foot, the slight curve of the arch, the texture of skin pressed into silt. They are labeled with the date, the location, and the case number. They are evidence of something that happened, but not of what it meant. Ashford, the ranger who first discovered the prints, transferred to a different park in 2011. In an exit interview, he mentioned the Newspaper Rock incident and said that he sometimes wondered if the person had been approaching the rock or leaving it. He said the prints led away from the wall, but everything about them suggested arrival, not departure. He did not elaborate. The rock is still there. The petroglyphs still watch the desert with carved eyes. And somewhere in the dry soil, erased now, but once perfectly preserved, were the steps of someone who walked with absolute certainty toward a destination they could not see, as if they had always known it would be waiting. There are borders in the world that weather cannot cross. Homolovi State Park lies approximately 3 miles northeast of Winslow, Arizona, on the high desert plateau where the Little Colorado River cuts through ancient Puebloan territory. The park preserves 4 major archaeological sites: the ruins of villages occupied between 1200 and 1300 AD by ancestors of the modern Hopi people. The landscape is characteristic of the Colorado Plateau. Scrubland dotted with juniper and rabbit brush, expanses of pale clay and sandstone, and long views broken only by distant mesas. Elevations range from 4,800 to 5,000 feet. The climate is arid and extreme, with summer temperatures exceeding 100 degrees and winter lows dropping below zero. The area receives approximately 8 inches of precipitation annually, most of it during the monsoon season between July and September. Meteorologically, northern Arizona is well studied. The National Weather Service maintains monitoring stations throughout the region, and climate data has been systematically collected since the early 20th century. Microclimates exist, localized variations in temperature and humidity caused by elevation changes, canyon walls, or bodies of water. But these are predictable and consistent with known atmospheric principles. They do not occur without physical cause. In October of 1996, a graduate student in atmospheric science from the University of Arizona named Kevin Patel was conducting field research on temperature inversions across the Colorado Plateau. His thesis focused on how nighttime cooling patterns were influenced by topography in semi-arid environments. He had placed a network of digital thermometers across a 10-square-mile area near Homolovi, recording data at 15-minute intervals over a 2-week period. On October 9th, while retrieving one of his instruments, he noticed that 2 thermometers positioned less than 20 feet apart were displaying readings that differed by 18 degrees Fahrenheit. Patel assumed equipment malfunction. He swapped the thermometers, tested them against a calibrated reference device, and repositioned them. The discrepancy remained. The thermometer on the eastern side of an unmarked area consistently read 18 to 20 degrees cooler than the one on the western side. He walked between the 2 instruments repeatedly, carrying a handheld thermometer. Each time he crossed a certain point, an invisible line he could not see but could feel, the temperature dropped sharply. The transition was not gradual. It was immediate, as if stepping through a threshold. Patel marked the boundary using survey flags and returned the following day with his thesis advisor, Dr. Lucia Mendoza, and 2 other graduate students, Garrett Williams and Priya Subramanian. They brought additional equipment, infrared thermometers, anemometers to measure wind speed, barometers, and humidity sensors. The 4 researchers spent 6 hours mapping the temperature differential. They determined that the boundary was linear, stretching roughly northeast to southwest for approximately 400 yards. On the eastern side, temperatures averaged 62 degrees Fahrenheit. On the western side, temperatures averaged 81 degrees. The difference was consistent across the entire length of the line, regardless of sun exposure, elevation, or vegetation. Dr. Mendoza examined the topography. The ground on both sides of the line was nearly identical, flat scrubland with minimal elevation change. There were no rock formations to create shade, no bodies of water to moderate temperature, no human structures that might influence local climate. Wind measurements showed no difference in air movement across the boundary. Humidity levels were the same. Barometric pressure was uniform. Every atmospheric variable they could measure was identical except temperature. Subramanian described the experience of crossing the line in her field notes. She wrote that the temperature change was physically disorienting, like walking from an air-conditioned room into summer heat, except that both sides were outdoors under the same sky. She noted that the transition occurred within a single step. She also mentioned a sensation she could not easily articulate, a feeling that time moved differently on the cooler side, though her watch showed no discrepancy. She wrote that standing on the eastern side of the line made her feel as though she were waiting for something that had already happened. Williams, who remained skeptical of subjective observations, focused on documentation. He photographed the thermometers, recorded video of the research team crossing the boundary with handheld instruments, and collected soil samples from both sides for later analysis. The soil samples, tested at the university's geology lab, showed no significant chemical or compositional differences. The ground was the same, the air was the same, but the temperature was not. Patel included the phenomenon in his thesis, submitted in May of 1997. He described it as an unexplained microclimate and recommended further study. Dr. Mendoza contacted colleagues in the Atmospheric Science Department and proposed a more comprehensive investigation. Funding was limited, and the project was not considered a priority. However, in August of 1998, a team from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, led by meteorologist Dr. Raymond Kowalski, visited the site as part of a broader study on plateau climate anomalies. Kowalski's team spent 3 days at Homolovi with advanced meteorological equipment including Doppler radar, satellite thermal imaging, and atmospheric profiling instruments. They confirmed the temperature differential. They also confirmed that it defied conventional explanation. In his report, dated September 4, 1998, Kowalski wrote that the boundary appeared to function as a thermal barrier with no identifiable physical mechanism. He noted that such a phenomenon was inconsistent with the laws of thermodynamics as currently understood. He recommended that the site be monitored long-term, but acknowledged that without a theoretical framework to explain the observations, no meaningful hypothesis could be tested. The report was filed with no AA and largely forgotten. Homolovi State Park continued to operate normally. Visitors hiked the trails, viewed the ruins, and experienced the desert climate without incident. Most people did not notice the temperature line because it was unmarked and occurred in an area slightly off the main trails. But some did. In 2001, a park ranger named Julia Okoro mentioned the phenomenon in a casual conversation with a visitor who had commented on the sudden temperature drop while hiking. Okoro said that rangers were aware of the line and that it had been there as long as anyone could remember. She said, local Hopi guides sometimes brought groups to the area and spoke about it as a boundary between seasons. Okoro also mentioned that she avoided spending extended time on the cooler side of the line because it made her uncomfortable in a way she could not explain. She said it felt like standing in a place that was still waiting for summer to arrive, even in the middle of July. A Hopi cultural liaison working with the park, Thomas Lomakwahu, was interviewed by a regional newspaper in 2004 about indigenous perspectives on the Homolovi ruins. Near the end of the interview, he mentioned the place where winter stays, a location known to Hopi elders but not widely discussed outside the community. He described it as a line in the desert where the cold season refused to leave, even when the rest of the land had warmed. He said it had been there for as long as his grandfather's grandfather could remember, and that it was not dangerous but should be respected. He did not elaborate on what respect meant in that context. Attempts to study the phenomenon systematically have been sporadic. In 2007, a climatology professor from Northern Arizona University, Dr. Amina Osman, secured funding for a short-term monitoring project. She installed permanent weather stations on both sides of the line and collected data for 6 months. The temperature differential remained consistent, averaging 17 degrees with no seasonal variation. Osman noted in her findings that the boundary did not shift, did not weaken, and showed no correlation with any known meteorological pattern. She wrote that standing on the cooler side for more than 30 minutes produced a subtle but persistent sense of temporal displacement, as if one's perception of duration became unreliable. She conducted informal surveys of students and volunteers who visited the site. 7 out of 9 reported similar sensations. None could describe it more precisely than a feeling that time was not passing at the expected rate. Osman's research was published in a minor academic journal in 2009. It generated no significant follow-up. The temperature line remains at Homolovi, undocumented on any official park map, unmarked by signs or barriers. It exists as a geographic fact without a scientific explanation, a place where the rules of heat and cold do not apply as they should. Patel, who first documented the line, returned to the site in 2015 while visiting family in Arizona. He walked to the boundary and stood on the cooler side for nearly an hour. In an email to Dr. Mendoza, sent that evening, he wrote that the line was still there, unchanged after 19 years. He also wrote that he finally understood what Subramanian had meant about time feeling different. He said that standing in that cold air, under the same sun that warmed the ground 20 feet away, made him feel as though he were standing in a memory of winter rather than winter itself. He said it was like being inside an echo of something that had already ended but refused to fade. The thermometers still read differently. The air still divides itself along an invisible seam, and those who cross it, even now, feel the cold close around them like a door that swings only one way, opening into a season that never quite arrives and never quite departs. Some sounds arrive before they are born. Wupatki National Monument sits on the high desert plateau of northern Arizona, approximately 30 miles north of Flagstaff, where the Painted Desert meets the ponderosa pine forests of the San Francisco Peaks. The monument preserves several Puebloan ruins built between 1100 and 1200 AD, multi-story stone structures that once housed farming communities in one of the harshest environments in North America. The landscape is volcanic, characterized by dark basalt formations, red sandstone, and sparse vegetation adapted to elevation and aridity. Water has always been scarce here. The ancient inhabitants depended on seasonal rainfall collected in cisterns and natural limestone sinkholes. When a 25-year drought began around 1250 AD, the pueblos were abandoned. The land was left to wind and silence. Scattered across the backcountry surrounding Wupatki are the remains of more recent occupation, homesteads from the late 1800s and early 1900s, when settlers attempted to farm and ranch in the area. Most failed within a decade. The wells they dug, often 30 to 50 feet deep through limestone and volcanic rock, were barely adequate during wet years and useless during droughts. By the 1930s, nearly all the homesteads had been abandoned. Some structures collapsed into their foundations. Others were maintained minimally by the National Park Service after the monument's establishment in 1924. A few wells were capped for safety. Others were left open, slowly filling with debris and sand. One such well lies approximately 3 miles east of the Wupatki Visitor Center, accessible only by an unmarked footpath that branches from the Donny Mountain Trail. The site is not listed on official park maps and receives almost no visitors. What remains of the homestead is minimal: a few foundation stones, fragments of rusted fencing, and the well itself, a circular stone-lined shaft roughly 4 feet in diameter, uncapped, with a wooden frame that has largely rotted away. Park records indicate the homestead was occupied briefly between 1908 and 1914 by a family whose name appears in census data as Holloway, though no detailed history of their residence has been preserved. In July of 1996, 2 geology students from Northern Arizona University, Marcus Delgado and Anya Petrofeur, were conducting a survey of abandoned wells in the Wupatki area as part of a hydrology study. They were documenting well depth, water table levels, and structural integrity. On July 22nd, they arrived at the Holloway homestead site in the late afternoon. Delgado dropped a weighted measuring tape into the well to determine its depth. Before releasing the weight, while still holding it at the well's edge, he heard the sound of it hitting water. He looked at Petrov. She had heard it too. The weight was still in his hand. Delgado dropped the weight. 2 seconds later, they heard the splash again. He pulled the tape back up and repeated the action. The same thing happened. The sound of impact arrived before the object fell. Petrov checked her watch and counted. The interval was consistent, between 2 and 3 seconds. They recorded the phenomenon using a handheld audio recorder, speaking timestamps as they dropped stones into the well. The recordings confirmed what they had heard. The splash preceded the drop. Delgado and Petrov reported their findings to their faculty advisor, Dr. Leonard Kurtzman, a hydrogeologist with 30 years of field experience. Kurtzman was skeptical but agreed to visit the site. On July 24th, he accompanied the students to the well, along with another faculty member, Dr. Sylvia Okonkwo, a physicist specializing in acoustics. Both professors witnessed the effect. Kurtzman dropped a rock and heard the splash before it left his fingers. Okonkwo used a stopwatch to measure the delay. The sound arrived 2.4 seconds early, consistently, across multiple trials. Okonkwo's initial hypothesis was that the sound was not an echo, but a delayed auditory perception, a neurological phenomenon rather than a physical one. However, the audio recordings eliminated that possibility. The microphone captured the same temporal sequence. The splash was recorded before the sound of the rock leaving the hand. Okonkwo then suggested the possibility of an echo originating from a previous sound, somehow trapped and re-released by the well's acoustics. But the effect occurred only when objects were dropped from the well's edge. When they played pre-recorded sounds into the well using a portable speaker, no temporal displacement occurred. The echoes returned at normal intervals, consistent with the well's depth. Kurtzman measured the well's depth at 43 feet. The water table was at 38 feet, 5 feet of standing water, likely stagnant. He dropped a plumb line to confirm the measurements. The well was straight, stone-lined, and structurally sound. There were no lateral chambers, no unusual features that would explain acoustic anomalies. Okonkwo examined the stone lining for materials that might have unusual reflective properties. The stones were local limestone and basalt, common throughout the region, with no special acoustic characteristics. The team returned to the university and consulted with colleagues in the physics and earth sciences departments. Dr. Hiroshi Yamamoto, a specialist in wave mechanics, reviewed the audio recordings and field notes. He confirmed that the temporal displacement was real and consistent, but could offer no conventional explanation. He noted that sound waves travel at a fixed speed through air, approximately 343 meters per second at sea level. A delay or early arrival of sound would require either a change in the speed of sound itself, which is determined by temperature, and air pressure, or a causal loop in which the effect precedes the cause. Neither was physically plausible under known conditions. In September of 1996, a formal research expedition was organized. The team included Kurtzman, Okonkwo, Yamamoto, 2 graduate students, and a technician from the university's audio engineering department, Robert Finch. They brought calibrated microphones, oscilloscopes, digital recorders, and high-speed cameras. They spent 2 days at the site, conducting over 100 trials, varying the mass of objects dropped, the speed of release, and the position of microphones and cameras. The results were consistent. When objects were dropped by hand from the well's edge, the sound of impact arrived 2 to 3 seconds before the drop occurred. The delay varied slightly depending on the size and density of the object, but remained within that range. High-speed video showed the object in hand motionless, while the audio track recorded the splash. When objects were dropped using mechanical releases, spring-loaded traps, timers, or remote triggers, the effect did not occur. The echoes returned normally. The temporal displacement happened only when a human hand was involved in the release. Okonkwo found this particularly disturbing. She stated in her field report that the well seemed to respond to intention rather than action. The sound appeared to anticipate the decision to drop an object, rather than reacting to the physical event. She wrote that this suggested a level of interaction between observer and environment that had no basis in classical physics and bordered on phenomena discussed only in theoretical quantum mechanics, which she emphasized had no application at macroscopic scales. Yamamoto proposed an alternative. He suggested that the well might exist in a localized temporal anomaly, a region where time flowed at a slightly different rate than the surrounding environment. However, he acknowledged that no mechanism in known physics could create such a condition, and no other measurable temporal effects were detected. Watches, clocks, and atomic timers all functioned normally at the site. Only sound exhibited the displacement. The findings were compiled into a report submitted to the National Park Service in November of 1996. The report recommended further study and suggested that the site be monitored for safety concerns, though no hazards were identified beyond the standard risks of an open well. The Park Service acknowledged the report, but took no further action. The site remained unmarked and largely unknown. In 2002, a journalist named Patricia Levesque, writing for a regional magazine about unexplained phenomena in the Southwest, visited the well and experienced the effect firsthand. In her article, published in the spring issue of Desert Mysteries, she described the sensation as deeply unsettling, not because of fear, but because of the quiet certainty that something fundamental about causality had been violated. She wrote that hearing the consequence of an action before committing to it felt like standing at the edge of a decision that had already been made in a future that was leaking backward into the present. The well remains open. The Park Service has made no effort to cap it, and it does not appear on visitor maps. Those who know about it visit occasionally, usually researchers or curiosity seekers who have read Levesque's article or heard rumors. The effect persists. Stones thrown into the well splash before they fall. The sound arrives early, clear, and unmistakable, as if the water is expecting them. In 2018, a theoretical physicist from MIT, Dr. Eleanor Voss, visited the site while attending a conference in Flagstaff. She spent an afternoon at the well conducting informal experiments with a digital audio recorder and a notebook. In an email to a colleague later that week, she wrote that the well was either an extraordinary hoax, one she could not debunk, or evidence of a causal structure that conventional physics could not accommodate. She noted that if the effect was genuine, it implied that the future, at least in some limited and localized sense, could exert influence on the present. She did not return to the site. She did not publish her observations. The well is still there, 43 feet deep, half filled with dark water that has not been fresh for a century. If you stand at its edge and hold a stone, you will hear it fall before you let it go. The sound is faint but unmistakable, a soft splash rising from the depths, arriving too soon, as if the well is listening not to what you do, but to what you are about to do. And it has been listening, quietly, for longer than anyone knows. Some signatures are written before the hand that makes them exists. The Little Colorado River Gorge cuts through the Navajo Nation in northeastern Arizona, a dramatic canyon system where the Little Colorado River flows northwest toward its confluence with the main Colorado River near the Grand Canyon. The gorge reaches depths of nearly 2,000 feet in places, with sheer walls of Kaibab limestone rising above a river that runs turquoise blue due to dissolved minerals from underground springs. The area is sacred to the Hopi people, who regard it as the Sipapuni, the place of emergence where their ancestors entered this world. Access is restricted, requiring permits from the Navajo Nation, and tourism is limited to preserve both the cultural significance and the fragile desert ecosystem. In the early 1950s, the National Park Service maintained a small seasonal outpost near the gorge's western rim, a single-room wooden structure used by rangers conducting wildlife surveys and monitoring water quality. The station was staffed sporadically, primarily during spring and summer months. By 1965, the structure had been decommissioned and abandoned. It collapsed partially during a windstorm in 1978, and the remaining walls fell during heavy rains in 1983. The site was never formally cleared, and the ruins were left to weather and decay. On April 7, 2004, a cultural resources specialist with the Navajo Nation Parks and Recreation Department, Dr. Joseph Benally, was conducting an archaeological survey of historical sites near the gorge when he discovered the remains of the old ranger station. While documenting the site, he found a leather-bound ledger partially buried under rotted timber and debris. The book was water-damaged but largely intact, its pages stiff and discolored but still legible. The cover bore no title or identifying marks. Inside, the pages contained handwritten entries, names, dates, and brief notations, apparently a visitor registry. Benally photographed the ledger and brought it back to the Navajo Nation Department of Historic Preservation in Window Rock, Arizona. Initial examination revealed that the entries spanned from March 1959 to October 1962. There were approximately 410 entries in total. Each entry included a name, a date, and occasionally a brief comment such as "clear day," "strong wind," or "saw eagles." The handwriting throughout the entire ledger was identical, the same script, the same slant, the same pressure and spacing. Every entry appeared to have been written by the same person. This was unusual but not immediately alarming. Benally assumed that a single ranger or volunteer had maintained the ledger, transcribing visitor information from verbal reports or other records. However, when he cross-referenced the names with National Park Service archives, Navajo Nation permit records, and historical visitation logs, he found no matches. None of the 400 names appeared in any official documentation from that period. There were no permits issued to those individuals, no correspondence, no incident reports. The names existed only in the ledger. Benally shared his findings with Dr. Margaret Whitmore, an archivist and historian at Northern Arizona University who specialized in Park Service history. Whitmore reviewed the ledger and confirmed that it appeared authentic. The paper stock, ink composition, and binding were consistent with materials used in the 1950s and early 60s. The handwriting was fluid and natural, showing none of the hesitation or irregularity that would suggest forgery or intentional deception. She noted that the entries followed a logical, chronological sequence, with dates progressing naturally over the 3-year span, and that the comments reflected plausible weather conditions and seasonal observations for the area. What disturbed Whitmore was the uniformity of the handwriting. She consulted with forensic document examiner Linda Sorensen, who had worked on historical authentication cases for the Smithsonian and the Library of Congress. Sorensen analyzed scans of the ledger pages and concluded that all entries were indeed written by a single hand. She noted that maintaining such consistency over 400 entries would require either extraordinary discipline or the entries being written in a single continuous session, which seemed impractical given the dates involved. She also pointed out subtle variations in ink darkness and line thickness that suggested the entries had been made over time, not all at once, yet the handwriting remained unnaturally uniform. In June of 2004, Benally and Whitmore began attempting to trace the names. They searched census records, obituaries, phone directories, and genealogical databases. Most names were common: John Miller, Sarah Martinez, David Thompson, making definitive identification difficult. However, they identified 17 individuals with matching names who were alive and could be contacted. Letters were sent requesting information about visits to the Little Colorado River Gorge area between 1959 and 1962. 11 people responded. None recalled visiting the gorge during that period. 3 had not yet been born. 2 were children at the time and had never traveled to Arizona. The remaining 6 had no memory of the location or of signing any visitor ledger. The case seemed to have reached a dead end. Then, in September of 2004, one of the respondents, a woman named Patricia Kowalski from Albuquerque, New Mexico, sent a follow-up letter. She stated that she had visited the Little Colorado River Gorge in 1998 while on a road trip with friends. She had not signed any ledger during that visit. However, when Benally's letter included a photocopy of the ledger page containing her name, she recognized the handwriting. She said it looked identical to her own handwriting from when she was 12 years old. She provided a sample, a page from a school notebook dated 1973. The similarity was striking. This prompted Benally and Whitmore to send photocopies of ledger entries to all 17 identified individuals, not just asking about visits, but about the handwriting itself. 4 more responded with similar observations. A man named Victor Delgado, who visited the gorge in 2001, said the handwriting matched his from high school. A woman named Amira Hassan, who had never visited the gorge but lived in Flagstaff, said the signature looked like hers from childhood, though she insisted she had never been to the site or signed any book. A retired school teacher named Robert O'Malley confirmed that he had visited the area in 1987 and said the handwriting was disturbingly similar to his own, though the date in the ledger, April 1961, predated his birth by 8 years. Whitmore contacted a psychologist specializing in memory and perception, Dr. Elena Vargas, to explore the possibility that the respondents were experiencing false pattern recognition, seeing familiarity in ambiguous stimuli. Vargas reviewed the samples and acknowledged that handwriting identification is subjective and prone to bias. However, she noted that the respondents' reactions were unusually specific and consistent. They did not merely say the handwriting looked similar, they identified it as matching their own writing from particular periods in their lives, often decades in the past. Vargas stated that this level of specificity was difficult to explain as simple pareidolia or suggestion. In 2005, Benally attempted to locate additional individuals whose names appeared in the ledger. He expanded his search to include obituaries, Social Security records, and military service files. He found 12 matches for people who had died between 1970 and 2004. He contacted surviving family members when possible, asking if the deceased had ever visited the Little Colorado River Gorge or if they recognized the handwriting samples. 3 families responded affirmatively, stating that the handwriting resembled that of their deceased relatives, though none could confirm visits to the gorge during the ledger's date range. One response was particularly unsettling. The daughter of a man named Thomas Holloway, who had died in 1996, said that her father had visited the gorge in 1992, several years before his death. She said he had mentioned experiencing a strange sensation while there, a feeling that he had been to the place before, even though it was his first visit. He had described it as standing in a memory that was not his own. She provided a sample of his handwriting from a letter dated 1989. It was a close match to the entry in the ledger dated July 1960, 32 years before his visit and 69 years after the supposed signature. Benally and Whitmore compiled their findings into a report submitted to the Navajo Nation Historic Preservation Department in December of 2005. The report detailed the ledger's contents, the handwriting analysis, the lack of corroborating records, and the testimonies of individuals who claimed the handwriting matched their own. The report concluded that the ledger represented an unexplained anomaly, either an elaborate hoax with no discernible motive or a genuine artifact that defied conventional understanding of causality and chronology. The department archived the report and the ledger but issued no public statement. The ledger is now stored in a climate-controlled facility in Window Rock. Researchers with appropriate permissions can view it, but few have requested access. The pages are fragile, yellowed with age, filled with names written in a hand that should not be the same but is. The dates progress logically. The comments are mundane. The ink has faded but remains legible. In 2011, a journalist writing about unexplained phenomena in the Southwest interviewed Benally about the ledger. Benally said that what disturbed him most was not the impossibility of the handwriting, but the implication that the names had been recorded in anticipation. He said it felt as though someone, or something, at the gorge had been keeping a registry of people who would eventually come, writing their names down before they arrived, using handwriting they had not yet developed. He said the ledger was not a record of the past. It was a record of a future that had already been written. The Little Colorado River Gorge is still there. The ruins of the ranger station are gone, eroded into dust. But the ledger remains, and the names remain, and Somewhere in the silent stone and the blue water below, the boundary between what has happened and what will happen may be thinner than anyone wants to believe. There are places where sound goes to die. Ward Terrace is a geological formation in the Painted Desert region of northern Arizona, approximately 18 miles southeast of the Petrified Forest National Park boundary. The terrace is a raised plateau of Chinle Formation mudstone, striped in layers of purple, gray, and rust, rising about 200 feet above the surrounding Badlands. The area is administered by the Bureau of Land Management and sees minimal visitation due to its remoteness and lack of established trails. Access requires a high-clearance vehicle and knowledge of unmarked dirt roads that become impassable during rain. The landscape is harsh and exposed. No trees, limited vegetation, and temperatures that swing from freezing winter nights to summer days exceeding 110 degrees. The region has no permanent water sources. Archaeological surveys have found minimal evidence of sustained human occupation, though scattered potsherds and lithic fragments indicate occasional use by ancestral Puebloan peoples as a travel corridor. Navajo oral traditions mention the area vaguely, referring to it as a place of stillness, though no specific stories or warnings have been formally documented. Geologically, the terrace is unremarkable, layered sedimentary rock deposited during the Triassic period, eroding slowly under wind and occasional rainfall. There are no caves, no significant mineral deposits, and no features that would distinguish it from dozens of similar formations across the Colorado Plateau. In August of 2007, a team of acoustic researchers from the University of New Mexico was conducting a study on natural echo patterns in desert environments. The project, led by Dr. Vincent Marquez, aimed to document how sound propagates across different geological formations, gathering data that could inform architectural acoustics and noise mitigation strategies. The team consisted of Marquez, two graduate students named Keisha Oladipo and Samuel Rothstein, and a field technician, Laura Pemberton. They had been working across northern Arizona for 6 weeks, recording echoes, measuring sound decay, and analyzing how terrain influenced acoustic behavior. On August 19th, the team set up equipment at Ward Terrace to record echo patterns from the plateau's edges and walls. They used calibrated speakers to generate test tones at various frequencies, microphones positioned at measured intervals, and specialized software to analyze the recordings. The morning session proceeded normally. Echoes returned as expected, with decay rates consistent with the distance and surface texture of the rock faces. At approximately 2:30 in the afternoon, while repositioning equipment, Oladipo walked to a section of the terrace roughly 300 yards from the main camp. She called out to Rothstein, who was 40 feet away. He did not respond. She called again, louder. No response. Rothstein was facing her, clearly visible, but showed no indication he had heard her. Oladipo walked toward him. At approximately 20 feet, Rothstein suddenly reacted, turning as if he had just heard her. He asked why she was shouting. She said she had been calling him for over a minute. He insisted he had heard nothing until she was close. They tested the phenomenon deliberately. Oladipo walked back to the spot where she had initially called out. Rothstein stood still. She shouted his name. He heard nothing. She clapped her hands. Nothing. She moved forward slowly, calling out at intervals. At a certain point, roughly 20 feet from where Rothstein stood, he suddenly heard her, as if she had appeared from silence. They marked the spot and called Marcus over. The team spent the next hour mapping what appeared to be a boundary. Inside a roughly circular area approximately 40 feet in diameter, sounds produced within could not be heard outside. Sounds produced outside could not be heard within. The boundary was not gradual. It was sharp, like crossing through an invisible wall. Pemberton stood at the center of the zone and shouted, while Marquez recorded from outside. His equipment registered nothing. No sound, no waveform, only ambient background noise from wind. When Pemberton stepped outside the boundary while still shouting, her voice immediately became audible. Marquez set up a speaker inside the zone and played a continuous test tone at 85 decibels, a volume equivalent to heavy traffic. He walked around the perimeter with a sound level meter. Outside the boundary, the meter read ambient levels of 30 to 35 decibels. The speaker was clearly visible, roughly 20 feet away, but produced no detectable sound. He stepped across the boundary. Instantly, the meter jumped to 85 decibels. The tone was loud and clear. He stepped back out. Silence. The team documented the phenomenon extensively over the next 3 days. They used laser rangefinders to map the zone's dimensions. It was not a perfect circle, but close, with a diameter varying between 38 and 42 feet. The zone's center was marked by a slight depression in the ground, a shallow basin of eroded mudstone about 10 feet across, but nothing visually distinguished it from surrounding terrain. They tested multiple frequencies, from low bass tones to high-pitched signals beyond the normal range of human hearing. All were blocked. They tested infrasound, subsonic vibrations below 20 hertz, also blocked. Rothstein, who had training in physics, suggested that the zone might be functioning as an acoustic black hole, a theoretical space where sound waves are trapped or absorbed so completely that they cannot escape. However, such a phenomenon would require specific geometric and material properties that were not present. The ground was solid mudstone. There were no structures, no underground chambers, no materials with unusual sound absorption characteristics. The air temperature, humidity, and wind speed inside and outside the zone were identical. There was no physical reason for the effect. Oladipo spent 30 minutes inside the zone alone, while the others monitored from outside. She carried a walkie-talkie which functioned normally. Radio waves were unaffected. She later described the experience in her field notes. She wrote that the silence was absolute, more profound than anything she had encountered in anechoic chambers or remote wilderness. She could hear her own breathing, her heartbeat, the sound of her clothes moving, but nothing else. No wind, no distant traffic, no birds. She wrote that after approximately 15 minutes, the silence began to feel oppressive, not as an absence, but as a presence. She described it as if silence were a substance, filling the space around her, pressing against her ears. She said that by the time she left the zone, she was certain that the silence was aware of her. Marquez contacted colleagues at the University of Arizona and the University of California, Berkeley, both of which had established acoustics research programs. He described the phenomenon and invited collaboration. Dr. Hiroshi Nakamura, a specialist in environmental acoustics, visited the site in September of 2007. He brought additional equipment, including accelerometers to measure ground vibrations and barometers to detect pressure changes. He confirmed the effect and found no conventional explanation. In his report, dated October 3, 2007, he wrote that the zone appeared to function as a perfect acoustic barrier with no identifiable mechanism. He noted that the effect was stable, present during day and night, in calm weather and wind, across all tested frequencies. Nakamura also noted something Marquez's team had observed but not formally documented. Wildlife avoided the zone. Lizards, insects, and birds were common across Ward Terrace, but none entered the silent area. Nakamura set up motion-activated cameras around the perimeter and left them for 2 weeks. The footage showed jackrabbits, coyotes, and various bird species approaching the boundary and then veering away, often abruptly, as if encountering an invisible obstacle. No animals crossed into the zone during the entire recording period. Attempts to explain the phenomenon scientifically stalled. Geologists from the Arizona Geological Survey examined the site in November of 2007 and found no subsurface anomalies. Ground-penetrating radar showed continuous mudstone layers with no voids, cracks, or structural irregularities. Atmospheric scientists measured air composition and found it identical to surrounding areas. No unusual gases, no temperature inversions, no pressure gradients. Marquez submitted a paper to the Journal of the Acoustical Society of America in January of 2008. It was rejected. Reviewers stated that the claims were extraordinary and required more rigorous peer verification. A second paper, submitted to a different journal, was also rejected on similar grounds. The site was quietly abandoned as a research focus. Marquez moved on to other projects. Oladipo completed her graduate work on a different topic and now teaches at a community college in California. Rothstein left academia and works in audio engineering for a film production company. Pemberton declined to discuss the experience in follow-up interviews, stating only that she had no interest in returning to Ward Terrace. In 2015, a geology instructor from Flagstaff named Thomas Grisham visited the site after reading about it in an online forum. He found the zone unchanged. He stood at the boundary and clapped his hands. The sound disappeared mid-clap as he stepped forward, returned as he stepped back. He entered the zone and sat in silence for 10 minutes. In a blog post written that evening, he described the sensation as deeply unsettling, not because of fear, but because of the absence of auditory context. He wrote that humans rely on ambient sound to orient themselves in space, and that its complete removal created a dissociative feeling, as if he were no longer part of the physical world. He also noted that the silence felt intentional, though he could not explain what he meant by that. The zone remains at Ward Terrace. No signs mark it. No fences protect it. It exists as an acoustic anomaly with no explanation, no institutional interest, and no resolution. Those who visit can step inside and experience a silence so total that it seems impossible, a quiet so complete that it suggests not the absence of sound, but the presence of something else, something that does not want to be heard, or does not want anything to be heard within it. And in that silence, where no echo returns and no voice carries, there is the inescapable sense that you are not alone, but that whatever shares the space with you has no need for sound and never has. Some monuments refuse to stay torn down. Paria Canyon is a narrow slot canyon carved through the Vermilion Cliffs in the high desert of northern Arizona, near the Utah border. The canyon stretches nearly 40 miles from its headwaters to its confluence with the Colorado River at Lee's Ferry, cutting through layers of Navajo sandstone in shades of cream, pink, and rust. The walls rise as high as 1,000 feet in places, narrowing at points to less than 10 feet across. Flash floods are common during monsoon season, and the terrain is unforgiving. No cell service, no maintained facilities, and temperatures that can exceed 110 degrees in summer. The Bureau of Land Management manages the area and requires permits for overnight travel. Day hikers are common on the southern sections of the trail, but the deeper canyon sees limited traffic due to its difficulty and remoteness. The Paria Canyon Trail has been used for centuries, first by indigenous peoples, including the Southern Paiute, and later by Mormon settlers in the 1800s who grazed livestock and established short-lived homesteads. Cairns, stacks of stones used as trail markers, are common throughout the Southwest, often built by hikers or land managers to indicate routes through confusing terrain. Most are functional, simple stacks that help prevent people from getting lost. Some are built impulsively by visitors and are considered vandalism, disrupting the natural landscape and creating false trails. In June of 1978, a BLM wilderness ranger named Daniel Ashford was conducting a routine patrol of the Paria Canyon Trail when he noticed a series of 7 cairns along a 2-mile section of the route, beginning approximately 4 miles from the Wire Pass trailhead. The cairns were unusual. They were not simple stacks, but elaborate constructions, each roughly 4 feet tall, built from stones of varying sizes carefully balanced in intricate configurations. The structures were stable, precisely assembled, and appeared intentional rather than casual. Ashford photographed them and noted their locations in his field report. He also noted that the cairns were not on the official trail. They sat approximately 30 to 50 yards off the path, in areas with no clear navigational purpose. Ashford's supervisor, Margaret Kowalski, reviewed the report and determined that the cairns should be dismantled. Unauthorized structures in wilderness areas violate BLM regulations, and false trail markers can endanger hikers. On June 23rd, Ashford returned to the site with another ranger, Luis Herrera, and they systematically dismantled all 7 cairns, scattering the stones across the surrounding terrain. They documented the dismantling process with photographs, showing the cairns reduced to scattered piles. Ashford noted in his report that some of the stones were unusually heavy, requiring 2 people to move, and that the rocks appeared to have been gathered from different locations based on their color and composition. On June 26th, 3 days later, a group of hikers reported seeing cairns along the same section of trail. Ashford returned on June 27th and found all 7 cairns rebuilt. They were identical in structure, height, and position to the originals. He compared his photographs. The configurations matched precisely, the same stones in the same arrangements, balanced at the same angles. Ashford dismantled them again, this time marking several of the larger stones with paint to track their movement. He placed some stones more than 100 yards from the cairn sites, scattering them deliberately to make reassembly difficult. On July 1st, the cairns were back. The painted stones had been returned to their original positions within the structures. Ashford had seen no one on the trail during his patrols. No permits had been issued for overnight camping in that section during the relevant dates. He installed a motion-activated camera aimed at one of the cairn sites on July 2nd. The camera was checked on July 5th. The cairn had been rebuilt. The camera had recorded nothing. No people, no animals, no movement. The footage showed only empty desert and then, in a later frame, the cairn standing complete as if it had always been there. Kowalski escalated the matter to the BLM district office in Kanab, Utah. Over the next 6 months, rangers dismantled the cairns repeatedly. Each time, within 48 to 72 hours, they reappeared. Additional cameras were installed. None captured the rebuilding process. In December of 1978, a geologist from the University of Arizona, Dr. Raymond Takahashi, was brought in to examine the stones. He documented the composition and origin of the rocks used in the cairns. His findings were unexpected. The stones were not local to the immediate area. They came from multiple locations scattered across half a mile of terrain, some from the canyon floor, some from ridges above, some from dry washes. The combined weight of the stones in all 7 cairns exceeded 800 pounds. Moving them to their current locations would have required significant physical effort and time. Dr. Takahashi also noted something else. Several of the stones showed signs of previous construction, flat surfaces worn smooth, edges that fit together with precision, as if they had been used in cairns before, many times. He could not date the wear, but said it suggested long-term repeated assembly. In his report, he speculated that the stones might have been used in similar structures for years or even decades, though there were no historical records of cairns in that specific area. In January of 1979, the BLM installed 4 high-resolution trail cameras covering all 7 cairn sites. The cameras were checked weekly. Over a 3-month period, the cairns were dismantled 5 times by rangers. Each time they rebuilt, themselves. The cameras recorded nothing. In April, BLM officials contacted the U.S. Geological Survey to request a seismic monitoring station, theorizing that ground vibrations or shifts might be causing the stones to move. The request was denied due to budget constraints and lack of scientific justification. Ashford, who had been monitoring the cairns since their initial discovery, began interviewing hikers who passed through the area. Most had not noticed the cairns or had assumed they were official trail markers. A few remembered seeing them and commented on their unusual appearance. One hiker, a woman named Sylvia Vargas from Flagstaff, mentioned in a written statement that she had camped near one of the cairns in August of 1979 and had woken in the night to a sound she described as stones clicking together like someone stacking rocks. But when she looked, she saw nothing, and the cairn appeared unchanged. In September of 1979, a team of 3 rangers, Ashford, Herrera, and a newer ranger named Keisha Rothstein, conducted a multi-day observation. They camped within sight of 2 of the cairn sites, maintaining a continuous watch over 48 hours. On the afternoon of the second day, they dismantled both cairns completely, carrying the stones more than 200 yards away and hiding them under brush. They returned to their camp and maintained observation until the following morning. At sunrise, both cairns were standing. The rangers had not slept. They had maintained shifts. None had seen or heard anything during the night. Rothstein later told Kowalski that watching the empty ground where the cairn had been, knowing it would return, produced a sensation she described as waiting for something inevitable that should not be possible. The incident was documented in an internal BLM memo dated September 18, 1979. The memo concluded that the phenomenon could not be explained by conventional means and recommended suspending active dismantling efforts, as they appeared to be ineffective and were consuming ranger time and resources. The recommendation was accepted. The cairns were left standing, and rangers were instructed to monitor but not disturb them unless they posed a safety hazard. Over the following decades, the cairns remained. They were photographed by hikers, mentioned in trail journals, and occasionally featured in local newspapers as a curiosity. In 1996, a reporter for a Flagstaff-based outdoor magazine, Thomas Okoro, visited the site and wrote an article titled "The Monuments That Won't Go Away." He interviewed Ashford, who had since retired, and reviewed BLM records. Ashford told him that he had stopped trying to understand the cairns and had come to view them as something the canyon wanted there, though he acknowledged that attributing intention to a landscape made no rational sense. In 2003, a group of geology students from Northern Arizona University, led by Professor Elena Delacroix, conducted a field study of the cairns as part of a course on desert geomorphology. They measured, photographed, and analyzed the structures. Delacroix noted in her report that the cairns showed no evidence of cement, adhesive, or human engineering. They were held together purely by gravity and balance. She also noted that several students reported feeling uncomfortable near the cairns, describing a sensation of being observed, though no other people were present. One student, Marcus Holloway, dismantled a portion of one cairn as an experiment. When the group returned the next day, it had been repaired. The cairns are still there. Rangers no longer attempt to dismantle them. Hikers pass them without incident, sometimes pausing to photograph them, sometimes adding a stone to the top, unaware that their contribution will be rearranged or removed the next time the cairns rebuild themselves. The cameras were eventually removed, their footage archived and unremarkable, hours of empty desert, and then, between frames, the sudden presence of stone towers that had not been there moments before. Ashford, in his final interview before his death in 2017, said that the cairns were the only mystery in his 30-year career that he never solved and never stopped thinking about. He said the most disturbing part was not that they rebuilt themselves, but that they rebuilt exactly, as if following a blueprint that existed somewhere outside human understanding. He said it suggested intention, memory, and purpose, qualities that stones should not possess, but somehow, in Paria Canyon, did. The trail is still open, the cairns still stand, and every few years a ranger or a curious hiker will knock one down, scattering its stones across the sand, and walk away satisfied that they have removed an unauthorized structure. Within 3 days, they could return and find it waiting, rebuilt in the same configuration, the same height, the same silent assertion that some things, once begun, do not end simply because we want them to. Sometimes people don't vanish. They're simply forgotten while still standing in plain sight. Moenkopi Wash cuts through the high desert of northern Arizona, a seasonal drainage channel that carries water only during spring snowmelt and summer monsoons. The wash originates in the Kaibab Plateau and winds northeast through Navajo Nation land before emptying into the Little Colorado River near Tuba City. For most of the year, the wash is a ribbon of dry sand and exposed sandstone bordered by sparse vegetation, greasewood, Mormon tea, and scattered juniper. The surrounding landscape is flat and featureless, offering long views interrupted only by distant mesas. Temperatures in summer regularly exceed 105 degrees. The area sees minimal human activity outside of occasional ranching and land surveys. The Bureau of Land Management has maintained jurisdiction over water rights and land use in the region since the 1950s. Surveys are conducted periodically to document changes in drainage patterns, erosion, and vegetation that might affect grazing allotments or water access. These surveys are routine work, typically assigned to small teams who spend days walking transects, taking measurements, and updating maps. The work is methodical, well-documented, and considered low risk. On June 9, 1981, a 7-person survey team departed from the BLM field office in Tuba City to conduct a water rights assessment along a 12-mile section of Moenkopi Wash. The team was led by senior surveyor Marcus Pemberton, age 41, with 18 years of experience. The other members were cartographer Elena Vasquez, hydrologist Derek Whitmore, field technicians Amina Osman and Robert Sorensen, environmental specialist Keisha Delgado, and junior surveyor Thomas Nakamura. All 7 signed the field assignment log that morning. The expedition was scheduled to last 2 days, with an overnight camp at a predetermined location midway along the survey route. The team departed at 7:30 in the morning in 2 vehicles, a truck and a van, carrying standard survey equipment including GPS units, measuring tapes, soil sampling tools, water quality test kits, and camping gear. They were expected to radio the field office by 6 that evening to confirm their position and status. Weather conditions were clear, with no storms forecasted. The terrain was familiar. Pemberton had worked the area multiple times, and detailed maps existed from previous surveys. At approximately 3:45 that afternoon, Pemberton radioed the field office. He reported that the survey was complete and that the team was returning ahead of schedule. He stated that all equipment had been recovered and all team members were accounted for. The office dispatcher, Linda Kowalski, noted the transmission in the log and confirmed receipt. Pemberton's voice was calm and routine. He provided no indication of problems or irregularities. The team arrived back at the Tuba City field office at 5:50, roughly 2 hours early. 6 people exited the vehicles: Pemberton, Vasquez, Whitmore, Osman, Sorensen, and Delgado. They unloaded equipment, submitted field notes, and began the standard post-survey debriefing. No one mentioned Thomas Nakamura. His name did not appear in the field notes. His equipment was not among the items returned. When Kowalski reviewed the sign-out log and asked about the seventh team member, the 6 surveyors looked at her with confusion. Pemberton stated that the team had consisted of 6 people. He provided the names of those present. Kowalski pointed to Nakamura's signature in the log. Pemberton examined it and said he did not recognize the name or the handwriting. Kowalski contacted the field office supervisor, Raymond Ashford, who arrived within 20 minutes. He interviewed the team members individually. All 6 maintained that the survey team had been 6 people from the beginning. They described the day's events in detail: the drive to the site, the work assignments, the measurements taken, the locations visited. Their accounts were consistent with each other but made no reference to a 7th person. When shown Nakamura's personnel file, which included his photograph, employment history, and assignment records indicating he had worked with several of them on previous projects, the team members showed no recognition. Vasquez became visibly upset, stating that she did not know who the person in the photograph was and asking why she was being shown a stranger's picture. Ashford contacted the Coconino County Sheriff's Office at 6:30. Deputies arrived by 7:15 and initiated a missing person investigation. Thomas Nakamura was 26 years old, 5 feet 9 inches tall, 160 pounds, with black hair and brown eyes. He had been employed by the BLM for 14 months and lived in Flagstaff with his younger sister, Yuki Nakamura. Yuki was contacted that evening and confirmed that her brother had left for work that morning and had mentioned the 2-day survey. She provided recent photographs and a description of the clothes he had been wearing: jeans, a blue work shirt, and hiking boots. A search and rescue operation was organized for the morning of June 10th. Teams from the Coconino County Sheriff's Office, Navajo Nation Police, and BLM Rangers deployed to Moenkopi Wash, focusing on the survey route documented in the team's field notes. Helicopters conducted aerial searches. Ground teams walked the wash and surrounding terrain. No trace of Nakamura was found. No footprints, no abandoned equipment, no signs of injury or distress. The search continued for 3 days, covering an area of approximately 50 square miles. Nothing was recovered. Investigators reviewed the vehicles used by the survey team. Both had been thoroughly cleaned and restocked, as was standard procedure after fieldwork. No personal items belonging to Nakamura were found. His equipment locker at the field office was intact, but the specific tools he had signed out that morning, a GPS unit, a field notebook, and a camera, were not returned. Records indicated he had checked them out. The equipment inventory showed them as missing. Yuki Nakamura provided investigators with additional documentation. Thomas had kept a personal journal and had written an entry on the evening of June 8th, the night before the survey. The entry mentioned his assignment to Moenkopi Wash and listed the names of his teammates, including Pemberton, Vasquez, and Whitmore. He had expressed enthusiasm about the project and had noted that it was his first major survey with Pemberton, whom he described as an experienced mentor. The journal was submitted as evidence. On June 15th, a forensic psychologist, Dr. Hiroshi Yamamoto, was brought in to evaluate the 6 surveyors. He conducted individual interviews and cognitive assessments. His findings, summarized in a report dated June 22nd, stated that all 6 individuals showed no signs of deception, psychological trauma, or memory impairment. They genuinely believed the survey team had consisted of 6 people. When presented with evidence of Nakamura's existence, photographs, work records, the field assignment log, they exhibited confusion and distress, but did not alter their accounts. Yamamoto noted that their conviction was absolute and appeared involuntary. He wrote that their certainty resembled confabulation, a phenomenon where the brain constructs false memories to fill gaps. But he emphasized that confabulation typically occurs in individuals with neurological damage, not in multiple healthy adults simultaneously. Investigators considered the possibility of conspiracy, that the 6 surveyors had colluded to hide Nakamura's disappearance. However, no motive could be established. Nakamura had no conflicts with his co-workers, no debts, no legal troubles. His personnel file was clean. Interviews with friends and family described him as reliable and well-liked. The 6 surveyors had no apparent reason to harm him or conceal his fate. Moreover, their confusion when confronted with evidence of his existence appeared genuine, and their distress seemed authentic. On July 8th, the Coconino County Sheriff's Office officially classified Thomas Nakamura as a missing person. The case remained open but inactive. No new leads emerged. The 6 surveyors returned to work, though Vasquez transferred to a different office within 6 months, and Delgado resigned from the BLM in 1982. Pemberton continued working until his retirement in 1998. In a 1996 interview with a journalist researching unsolved disappearances, Pemberton stated that he had no memory of Thomas Nakamura and found the entire matter bewildering. He said that being told he had forgotten a colleague disturbed him deeply, but that he could not manufacture a memory that did not exist. Yuki Nakamura never accepted the official conclusion. She maintained that her brother had been erased, not physically, but from the recollection of those who had been with him. In a letter to the BLM director written in 1983, she argued that something had happened in Moenkopi Wash that the agency did not understand and was unwilling to investigate further. She received a formal reply acknowledging her concerns, but stating that no additional evidence had been found to warrant reopening the case. In 2009, a researcher studying anomalous disappearances in the Southwest, Dr. Patricia Okonkwo, visited Moenkopi Wash and interviewed individuals familiar with the Nakamura case. She spoke with retired BLM employees, including Kowalski, who remembered the incident vividly. Kowalski told Okonkwo that she had never encountered anything like it. 6 people returning from a routine survey with no recollection of a colleague who had been with them hours earlier. She said that what disturbed her most was not that Nakamura had vanished, but that his existence had been removed from their awareness so completely that they could not even recognize his name. Okonkwo also interviewed Amina Osman, one of the 6 surveyors, who was still living in Arizona. Osman said she had been contacted multiple times over the years by journalists and investigators. She maintained that she had no memory of Thomas Nakamura and that being repeatedly told she had forgotten someone was psychologically exhausting. She said that in quiet moments, she sometimes wondered if there was a gap in her memory, a space where someone should be, but that she could never locate it or describe it. She said it felt like trying to remember a dream that had dissolved upon waking. Thomas Nakamura was declared legally dead in 1988, 7 years after his disappearance. His sister held a memorial service. His belongings were distributed among family members. His name was added to a list of BLM employees lost in the line of duty, though the circumstances remained officially unexplained. Moenkopi Wash is still there, dry most of the year, filled with rushing water after storms. Survey teams still walk its length, taking measurements and updating records. None have reported anomalies. The site where the 1981 survey took place is unremarkable: sand, stone, and sky. There is no marker, no memorial, nothing to indicate that something impossible occurred there. But the field assignment log from June 9, 1981, still exists in BLM archives. 7 names are written on it. 7 people signed out that morning. 6 returned. And the 6 who came back have no memory of the 7th, as if he had never existed at all, as if the world itself had quietly revised the day's events and erased him from the story while it was still being written. There are structures that refuse to stay where they are placed. Dinabita Wash is a seasonal drainage in northeastern Arizona, cutting through Navajo Nation land, approximately 40 miles north of Winslow. The wash flows only during spring snowmelt and summer monsoons, carving channels through layers of Moenkopi sandstone and Chinle shale. The surrounding landscape is high desert plateau, sparse juniper, sagebrush, and stretches of exposed red clay that crack and curl in the heat. Elevations range from 5,400 to 5,800 feet. Summers are brutal, with temperatures exceeding 110 degrees. Winters bring freezing nights and occasional snow. The area is remote, accessible only by dirt roads that become impassable during rain. The region was occupied by ancestral Puebloan peoples between approximately 1000 and 1300 AD, part of a broader cultural landscape that included sites like Homolovi and Wupatki. Hundreds of small ruins dot the area, masonry structures, pipe houses, and isolated room blocks built from shaped sandstone. Most were abandoned during the Great Drought of the late 1200s, when populations migrated toward more reliable water sources. The ruins that remain are modest, often consisting of partial walls, collapsed rooms, and scattered pottery sherds. They are protected under the Archaeological Resources Protection Act and monitored by the Navajo Nation Historic Preservation Department. One such ruin sits approximately 2 miles west of Dinabito Wash, near a dry tributary that locals call Red Clay Wash. The structure is small, a rectangular room block roughly 20 feet by 15 feet, with walls standing 3 to 4 feet high. Archaeological surveys conducted in the 1960s identified it as a seasonal habitation site, likely occupied for short periods during resource gathering. The site was assigned an identification number in the Arizona State Museum's database and mapped using traditional surveying methods. No excavation was conducted. The site was considered archaeologically insignificant compared to larger, more intact ruins in the region. In 1994, the Navajo Nation initiated a digital mapping project to create GPS coordinates for all known archaeological sites within its jurisdiction. The project aimed to improve site monitoring, prevent looting, and provide accurate data for land use planning. A team of archaeologists and surveyors, led by Dr. Margaret Whitmore from Northern Arizona University, spent 2 years visiting sites and recording their coordinates using differential GPS equipment accurate to within 1 meter. On July 12, 1994, Whitmore's team visited the ruin near Red Clay Wash. They recorded its GPS coordinates as 35.42 degrees north, 110.87 degrees west. The data was entered into the database, and the site was photographed from multiple angles to document its condition. The work was routine. The team moved on to other locations. In 1999, a follow-up survey was conducted to verify the accuracy of the GPS database and document any changes in site condition due to erosion or vandalism. On August 3rd, a team led by archaeologist Dr. Joseph Benally returned to the Red Clay Wash ruin. Using the coordinates from the 1994 survey, they navigated to the site with handheld GPS units. The ruin was there, exactly where expected, but when they recorded new GPS coordinates, the readings differed. The new coordinates placed the site approximately 12 feet northeast of the original position. Benally assumed the discrepancy was due to equipment error or changes in GPS satellite configurations. He noted it in his field report but did not consider it significant. However, when the database was updated in 2000, a GIS specialist named Linda Kowalski noticed the coordinate shift and flagged it for review. She cross-referenced the original survey photographs with the new ones. The ruin appeared identical in position relative to surrounding landmarks: a distinctive juniper tree, a large basalt boulder, and the wash itself. The coordinates had shifted, but the physical site had not. Kowalski contacted Whitmore and Benally. In September of 2000, the three returned to the site with high-precision GPS equipment and surveying tools. They established a baseline using the basalt boulder, which was too large to have moved. They measured the distance from the boulder to the ruin's northwest corner. The measurement matched the 1994 data. They then recorded GPS coordinates. The readings showed the site had shifted another 10 feet to the northeast since 1999. Whitmore examined the ruin carefully. The walls were stable. There was no evidence of collapse, reconstruction, or disturbance. The ground beneath the structure showed no signs of subsidence or movement. The site sat on bedrock sandstone, not loose soil. Physically, the ruin had not moved, yet the GPS data insisted it had. Over the next 5 years, the site was monitored annually. Each visit confirmed the same pattern. The ruin remained in the same physical location relative to surrounding landmarks, but its GPS coordinates drifted steadily northeast at a rate of 10 to 15 feet per year. By 2005, the coordinate discrepancy had accumulated to over 100 feet. The site's database entry no longer aligned with its actual position. Attempts to navigate to the ruin using the recorded GPS coordinates led to an empty patch of ground 100 feet southwest of the actual structure. Dr. Hiroshi Yamamoto, a geophysicist from the University of Arizona, was consulted in 2006. He reviewed the data and proposed several hypotheses. One possibility was tectonic movement, gradual shifting of the Earth's crust that could displace GPS reference points. However, northern Arizona is not a seismically active region, and no other archaeological sites in the database showed similar coordinate drift. Another possibility was satellite configuration changes or errors in the GPS system itself, but differential GPS corrections should have accounted for those. Yamamoto visited the site in October of 2006 and conducted a ground survey using total station equipment, which measures angles and distances without relying on GPS. His measurements confirmed that the ruin had not moved relative to surrounding features. The anomaly was confined to GPS data. In 2007, Whitmore's team attempted to install permanent monitoring equipment at the site. They placed 4 GPS receivers at the corners of the ruin, each recording coordinates continuously and transmitting data via satellite link. The equipment was solar-powered and designed to operate autonomously for months. Within 72 hours, all 4 units malfunctioned. The solar panels functioned normally, but the GPS receivers stopped transmitting coherent data. When the team retrieved the units in November, the stored data showed erratic coordinate readings, rapid oscillations, as if the sensors had been in constant motion, spinning or tumbling. Yet the units had been securely mounted to bedrock and showed no signs of physical disturbance. Yamamoto analyzed the recovered data. He noted that the coordinate oscillations were not random. They followed a pattern, repeating in cycles of approximately 18 hours. He could offer no explanation. He wrote in his report that the equipment had functioned correctly from a technical standpoint, but had recorded movement that did not physically occur. He described it as if the sensors had been measuring displacement in a dimension or frame of reference that did not align with observable reality. A second attempt to install monitoring equipment was made in 2008, using different technology, accelerometers and seismometers designed to detect physical movement, not GPS coordinates. The equipment was installed in May and monitored remotely. By July, the accelerometers were recording constant low-frequency vibrations, consistent with the site being in motion, yet visual inspections showed the ruin completely stationary. The seismometers recorded no ground vibrations that would explain the accelerometer data. The equipment was removed in August. No further monitoring attempts were made. Benally interviewed Navajo elders familiar with the area in 2009, seeking traditional knowledge that might contextualize the phenomenon. An elder named Thomas Yazzie, who had grown up near Dinabito Wash, said that his grandfather had spoken of certain ruins that walked at night, moving slowly across the land over generations. Yazzie clarified that this was not meant literally, but was a way of describing sites that seemed to shift position over time, appearing in places they had not been before. He said such sites were considered restless, built on ground that had not settled, and were avoided when possible. In 2012, a journalist named Patricia Levesque wrote an article about the site for a regional archaeology magazine. She visited the ruin and spoke with Whitmore, Benally, and Kowalski. Whitmore told her that the coordinate drift had continued unabated, accumulating to over 150 feet. The ruin's database entry was now so inaccurate that it was functionally useless. Whitmore said that what disturbed her most was not the technical anomaly, but the implication that GPS coordinates, numbers meant to describe fixed positions on Earth, were somehow inadequate or unstable when applied to this specific site. She said it suggested that the site existed in a spatial relationship that could not be accurately described using conventional geodetic systems. Kowalski, the GIS specialist, noted that property boundaries and survey markers near the ruin had not shifted. Legal descriptions of the land, established decades earlier using traditional surveying methods, remained accurate. Fences, roads, and other human-made features aligned correctly with maps. Only the GPS coordinates of the ruin itself drifted. She said it was as if the structure occupied a position that was fixed in physical space but fluid in digital representation, a place that could be seen and touched but not precisely located. The Navajo Nation Historic Preservation Department officially removed the site's GPS coordinates from its database in 2015, replacing them with a textual description of its location relative to landmarks. The decision was pragmatic. The coordinates were useless and potentially misleading. The site was listed as non-locatable by GPS in internal documentation. The ruin is still there. It can be reached by following Red Clay Wash, walking 2 miles from the nearest road, and looking for a distinctive juniper tree and a large basalt boulder. The walls still stand, weathered and cracked, the same height they were in 1994. Photographs from different years show it unchanged, but its coordinates, measured year after year, continue to drift northeast, accumulating distance in numbers that have no correspondence to physical reality. Whitmore retired in 2018. In a final interview, she said the ruin near Red Clay Wash was the only archaeological site in her 40-year career that she could not fully document. She said that archaeology depends on precise location, on knowing where things are, where they were, and where they will remain. A site that moves, even if only in abstraction, undermines that certainty. She said it was unsettling to realize that some places might be fundamentally unmappable, existing in ways that resist translation into the coordinates and grids humans use to organize the world. The GPS data continues to accumulate, stored in files that grow more divorced from reality each year. The ruin has not moved. It has never moved. But the numbers say it has, and the numbers do not lie. They simply describe something we do not yet understand. Some rain does not fall, it returns. White Mesa sits in the high desert of southeastern Utah, approximately 15 miles south of Blanding, near the Colorado border. The mesa rises abruptly from surrounding terrain, a flat-topped formation of Dakota sandstone and Mancos shale roughly 8 miles long and 2 miles wide at its widest point. Elevations at the mesa's surface range from 6,200 to 6,400 feet. The landscape is sparse: juniper, pinon pine, sagebrush, and yucca clinging to thin soil over bedrock. The area experiences a semi-arid climate with approximately 12 inches of annual precipitation, most arriving as thunderstorms during late summer monsoon season. Winter brings occasional snow. Temperatures swing dramatically from summer highs above 95 degrees to winter lows well below zero. White Mesa is part of the ancestral territory of the Ute Mountain Ute tribe and has been continuously occupied or utilized by indigenous peoples for centuries. The mesa contains archaeological sites, petroglyphs, and traditional gathering areas. In the 1950s, uranium mining began in the region, and a small processing mill was constructed near the mesa's northern edge. The mill operated intermittently through the 1980s, leaving a legacy of environmental concern and ongoing remediation efforts. The area is remote, with a population of fewer than 300 people, most living in the small communities of White Mesa Village. On August 14, 1969, a summer thunderstorm moved across White Mesa during the late afternoon. The storm was typical for the season: dark clouds, lightning, gusty winds, and heavy rain lasting approximately 40 minutes. A rancher named Samuel Whitmore, who lived near the mesa's eastern edge, was driving home when the storm began. He pulled off the road to wait for visibility to improve. While sitting in his truck, he observed rain falling normally from the clouds, and then, for a period he estimated at 2 to 3 minutes, he saw droplets rising from the ground back into the sky. Whitmore described the phenomenon in a written statement given to a county sheriff's deputy 2 days later. He said the upward-moving rain was concentrated in a specific area roughly 100 yards from where he had parked, visible against the darker background of the storm clouds. The droplets appeared to rise steadily, not chaotically, moving upward in streams as if drawn by an invisible force. He said it looked like a film of rain played in reverse, except that normal rain continued to fall in surrounding areas. He watched until the storm passed, and the effects stopped. When the rain ended, he drove to the location where he had seen the upward movement. The ground was wet, as expected after a storm, but otherwise unremarkable. Whitmore's account was filed as a curiosity and largely forgotten. He mentioned it occasionally to friends and family, but did not pursue official investigation. In 1973, a similar event was reported. On July 22nd, during another monsoon storm, a teacher from Blanding named Margaret Delacroix was hiking near White Mesa with her husband. They took shelter under a rock overhang as rain began. Delacroix later told a local newspaper reporter that she observed rain rising from the ground approximately 50 yards from their position. She said it lasted less than a minute, but was unmistakable, water moving upward in visible streams, rejoining the clouds above. Her husband, Thomas Delacroix, confirmed the account. Both described the phenomenon as surreal but not frightening, more puzzling than alarming. Over the following decades, 4 additional incidents were reported, all occurring during summer rainstorms. In 1981, a geologist conducting fieldwork for the U.S. Geological Survey, Dr. Elena Vargas, observed and photographed upward-moving rain near White Mesa. Her photographs, taken with a 35mm camera, show streaks of light moving vertically against a dark sky, images consistent with rain but oriented in the wrong direction. In 1994, 2 hikers from Cortez, Colorado, named Keisha Oladipo and Robert Finch, reported seeing the effect and recorded approximately 30 seconds of video using a handheld camcorder. The footage, later reviewed by meteorologists, shows what appears to be precipitation rising from the ground, though image quality is poor and details are difficult to verify. The most recent documented incident occurred on August 9, 2003. A National Weather Service technician named Luis Herrera was servicing an automated weather station near White Mesa when a storm passed through. He witnessed upward-moving rain and immediately radioed his supervisor, Dr. Raymond Takahashi, who was stationed in Grand Junction, Colorado. Herrera described the phenomenon in real time over the radio, stating that he was watching rain rise from the ground in a localized area approximately 75 yards from his position. The effect lasted roughly 90 seconds. Herrera collected soil samples from the affected area immediately after the storm and submitted them for analysis. Dr. Takahashi reviewed the samples and Herrera's report. He contacted colleagues at the National Center for Atmospheric Research and the University of Utah to investigate. In October of 2003, a team of meteorologists and atmospheric physicists visited White Mesa to assess the phenomenon. The team included Dr. Amina Hassan from the University of Utah and Dr. Victor Marquez from Colorado State University. They interviewed Herrera, reviewed his field notes, and examined the weather data recorded during the August 9th event. The data showed typical monsoon conditions, unstable air, strong updrafts, and moderate to heavy precipitation. There were no atmospheric anomalies that would explain rain moving upward. Hassan noted that updrafts within thunderstorms can suspend or loft small water droplets temporarily, but such effects occur inside the storm cloud, not at ground level, and do not produce the organized vertical streams described by witnesses. Marquez examined the soil samples collected by Herrera. Laboratory analysis revealed normal composition: sandstone-derived sediment, clay, organic material, and trace minerals consistent with the region. There were no unusual chemicals, no electromagnetic properties, and no detectable residues that might explain the phenomenon. The team spent 3 days at White Mesa, setting up portable weather monitoring equipment and waiting for storms. No unusual precipitation occurred during their visit. Hassan wrote in her preliminary report, dated November 5, 2003, that the eyewitness accounts were credible and consistent, but that no physical mechanism could be identified to explain upward-moving rain under normal atmospheric conditions. She noted that the phenomenon, if genuine, would require a force capable of reversing gravitational acceleration on water droplets, which was not plausible within known physics. Marquez proposed an alternative explanation in a follow-up memo. He suggested that the witnesses might have observed a rare optical illusion caused by specific lighting conditions during storms, perhaps reflections or refractions that created the appearance of upward motion. However, this hypothesis struggled to account for the consistency of descriptions across multiple independent witnesses over several decades, or for the video and photographic evidence, limited as it was. In 2004, a botanist from the University of New Mexico, Dr. Hiroshi Yamamoto, conducted an unrelated survey of plant communities near White Mesa. While reviewing his data, he noticed an anomaly in the root structure of vegetation in certain areas. Plants growing in locations where upward rain had reportedly been observed, coordinates provided by Herrera and cross-referenced with witness accounts, exhibited unusually shallow root systems. Juniper trees, which typically develop deep taproots to access groundwater, showed roots extending only 2 to 3 feet below the surface before spreading laterally. Yamamoto collected core samples and found that below approximately 3 feet, the soil became increasingly compacted and resistant to root penetration, despite appearing physically similar to surrounding soil. Yamamoto hypothesized that something beneath the surface, a subsurface feature, perhaps a water table anomaly, or a mineral deposit, was inhibiting deep root growth. However, ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted in 2005 found no subsurface structures, voids, or unusual formations. The bedrock beneath the soil was continuous Dakota sandstone, consistent with geological expectations. There was no physical barrier that should prevent root penetration. The correlation between shallow roots and Reported upward rain locations was documented in Yamamoto's research, published in a regional ecology journal in 2006, but drew little attention. He noted in his conclusion that the shallow root phenomenon might be coincidental, or might indicate some localized soil condition not yet identified. He made no direct claim about a connection to meteorological anomalies, acknowledging that his expertise did not extend to atmospheric science. The National Weather Service quietly archived the White Mesa reports in 2007. No formal investigation was pursued. Takahashi, who had initially coordinated the 2003 response, retired in 2009. In a personal interview conducted by a graduate student researching unusual weather phenomena in 2011, Takahashi said that the White Mesa incidents remained unexplained and that he found the consistency of witness accounts compelling. He said that what troubled him most was not the impossibility of the phenomenon, but the fact that it had occurred multiple times over decades in the same general location, suggesting a persistent rather than random cause. Herrera, the weather technician who observed the 2003 event, transferred to a different regional office in 2008. In a 2012 email exchange with a meteorology professor, he stated that he remained certain of what he had seen, and that the experience had made him question assumptions about atmospheric behavior. He wrote that watching rain rise into the sky felt like witnessing a fundamental rule of nature being quietly ignored, as if gravity, in that moment and that place, had become optional. White Mesa remains sparsely populated and largely unchanged. Storms still pass through during monsoon season. Rain falls as expected. No further incidents have been formally reported since 2003, though anecdotal accounts occasionally surface in online forums and local conversations. The locations where upward rain was observed are unmarked and indistinguishable from surrounding terrain. The shallow-rooted plants continue to grow there, their roots turning laterally rather than descending, as if something below the soil warns them not to go deeper. The photographs and video footage exist in archives, grainy, ambiguous, but persistent, water moving the wrong way, drops returning to clouds, a reversal too specific to be imagined and too consistent to be dismissed, recorded by people with no reason to fabricate and no incentive to lie. And beneath the ground, in soil that looks the same as any other but resists the downward reach of roots, there may be something that has not yet been named, something that pulls water upward when the conditions align, something patient, waiting beneath the surface of White Mesa, undetected and undisturbed, exerting a quiet influence that defies explanation and continues, storm after storm, to reverse the falling rain. Some things are seen by everyone, but photographed by no one. The Painted Desert Wilderness encompasses roughly 43,000 acres of the Petrified Forest National Park in northeastern Arizona, a landscape of banded badlands where layers of Chinle Formation mudstone create sweeping patterns of red, purple, gray, and white across eroded hills. The wilderness is roadless and largely trailless, designated in 2004 to preserve its remote character. Elevations range from 5,400 to 5,800 feet. Temperatures in summer exceed 110 degrees. Water is non-existent. The terrain is difficult. Loose clay, steep washes, and expansive vistas with few distinguishing landmarks. Navigation requires maps, compass, and experience. Visitors are rare. The area has been occupied intermittently for millennia. Ancestral Puebloan sites dot the wilderness, small masonry structures, lithic scatters, and potsherds indicating seasonal use. Petroglyphs appear on isolated boulders and rock faces. The Navajo and Hopi consider portions of the region culturally significant, though specific sites are not publicly identified. During the 1930s and 40s, uranium prospectors explored the area, leaving behind survey markers and abandoned claims. By the 1950s, most activity had ceased. The wilderness reverted to silence. In October of 1998, a backpacker named Daniel Ashford was hiking through the southern section of the Painted Desert Wilderness when he discovered a metal ammunition box bolted to a flat section of sandstone bedrock in a small basin surrounded by low ridges. The box was weathered but intact, secured with a simple latch. Inside, wrapped in plastic, was a spiral-bound notebook. The first entry was dated June 19, 1947. The entry, written in pencil, read, "Arrived at 1400 hours. Observed figure on northeast ridge. Stood motionless for approximately 11 minutes. Dark clothing. Could not determine gender or age. Figure vanished. No movement prior to disappearance. Simply gone." J. Holloway. Ashford flipped through the notebook. It contained over 200 entries, spanning from 1947 to 1997. Every entry followed a similar format: a date, a time of arrival, and a description of seeing a figure on the northeast ridge. The descriptions were remarkably consistent. The figure always stood in the same general location. It was always motionless. It was always visible for approximately 11 minutes. It always vanished without walking away. The entries were written by different people. Names, handwriting, and writing implements varied, but the content was nearly identical. Ashford added his own entry describing his discovery of the box and noting that he had not seen any figure during his visit. He photographed the notebook pages and reported the finding to the National Park Service upon his return. A ranger named Margaret Whitmore retrieved the box in November of 1998 and brought it to park headquarters for review. Whitmore examined the notebook carefully. The entries spanned 50 years. Some were detailed, others terse. A few included sketches, crude drawings of a human silhouette standing on a ridge. Several entries mentioned attempts to photograph the figure, always noting that the photographs came out blank or blurred. One entry from August of 1973, signed by someone named Patricia Levesque, read, "Tried binoculars. Figure appeared closer, but details remained obscured. Clothing dark, possibly a coat or cloak. No visible face. Stood perfectly still. Disappeared at minute 11. Felt watched entire time. Looked behind me repeatedly. Nothing there." Whitmore shared the notebook with the park's cultural resources staff and law enforcement rangers. No one could explain it. The box's location was not marked on any map. The park had no record of the site. The entries suggested that visitors had been finding the box and adding to the logbook for decades, but there was no indication of who had placed it there or why. In January of 1999, Whitmore and two other rangers, Luis Herrera and Keisha Oladipo, hiked to the site. They located the metal box using GPS coordinates recorded by Ashford. The terrain was as described, a small basin surrounded by ridges, the northeast ridge slightly higher than the others, approximately 400 yards away. They arrived at midday and waited. At approximately 13:30, Herrera said he saw something on the ridge. Whitmore and Oladipo looked. All three confirmed a figure standing motionless on the ridgeline. Through binoculars, the figure appeared human-shaped, dark against the pale clay, but details were unclear. They watched for 11 minutes, timing it with a stopwatch. At minute 11, the figure was gone. None of them saw it move or leave. It was simply absent. Oladipo attempted to photograph the figure during the observation using a digital camera with a telephoto lens. When she reviewed the images, the ridge was visible, but empty. No figure appeared in any frame, despite all three rangers confirming they had seen it with their eyes. Herrera said later that the experience was disorienting, seeing something clearly, knowing his colleagues saw it too, and then finding no evidence of it in the photographs. The rangers hiked to the northeast ridge the following day to search for tracks, clothing, or any sign of human presence. They found nothing. The ridge was bare clay and scattered stones, showing no footprints or disturbances. Whitmore noted in her report that the ridge offered a clear view of the basin where the metal box was located, and that anyone standing there would have been visible from below, but that accessing the ridge required a steep climb, and there was no obvious reason for someone to stand there repeatedly over decades. In March of 1999, the Park Service contacted Dr. Raymond Takahashi, a psychologist at Northern Arizona University who specialized in perception and eyewitness reliability. Takahashi reviewed the notebook entries and interviewed the three rangers. He proposed that the phenomenon might be a form of pareidolia, pattern recognition in which the brain interprets random shapes as familiar objects, in this case a human figure. However, he acknowledged that pareidolia typically produces inconsistent interpretations among different observers, and the descriptions in the notebook were remarkably uniform. He also noted that the 11-minute duration was oddly specific and consistent across entries, which was difficult to explain if the sightings were purely subjective. In June of 1999, a researcher from the University of Arizona, Dr. Amina Hassan, visited the site with equipment to document the phenomenon. She brought high-resolution cameras, video recorders, and thermal imaging devices. She and two graduate students, Victor Marquez and Elena Vargas, stationed themselves in the basin and waited. At approximately 1500 hours, all three observers reported seeing a figure on the northeast ridge. Hassan activated all recording equipment. The figure remained visible for 11 minutes and then disappeared. When Hassan reviewed the footage, none of the devices had captured the figure. Video showed an empty ridge. Thermal imaging detected no heat signature. Photographs were blank. Hassan wrote in her report, dated July 12, 1999, that the observers' perceptions were consistent and sincere, but that no technological method had successfully documented the figure. She speculated that the phenomenon might involve an atmospheric effect, a mirage or refraction that was visible to the human eye but not captured by cameras. However, mirages typically require specific temperature gradients and are not known to occur reliably in the same location over decades. The metal box and notebook remained at the site. Park policy decided against removing it, as doing so might disrupt what had become an informal tradition. Visitors continued to find the box, see the figure, and add entries. By 2010, the original notebook was full, and a second notebook had been placed in the box by an unknown visitor. Entries continued. The descriptions remained consistent. The figure appeared. It stood for 11 minutes. It vanished. In 2015, a filmmaker documenting unusual phenomena in the Southwest, Thomas Okoro, visited the site with a small crew. They recorded their observations, interviewed park rangers, and examined the notebooks. Okoro and his crew saw the figure. Their cameras did not. Okoro later said in an interview that the experience left him unsettled, not because it was frightening, but because it was inexplicable in a way that resisted all attempts at documentation. He said it felt like being shown something that existed only in human perception, invisible to machines. One entry in the second notebook, dated April of 2008 and signed by someone named Sylvia Rothstein, described an experiment. Rothstein wrote that she had stationed herself on the northeast ridge while a friend remained in the basin. Her friend reported seeing the figure as usual. Rothstein, standing on the ridge, saw nothing where the figure should have been, but she wrote that she felt watched, intensely and continuously, as if something in the valley below was observing her with the same fixation that others reported when seeing the figure. She wrote, "It watches from where I stand, but I cannot see it. Perhaps the figure is not on the ridge. Perhaps the figure is wherever the observer is not. The Park Service has made no official statement about the site. It is not mentioned in visitor materials. Rangers are aware of it but do not actively monitor it. The notebooks remain in the metal box, accumulating entries. Over 200 people have recorded seeing the same figure in the same location, behaving in the same way, across 7 decades. None have photographed it. None have explained it. The painted desert wilderness is vast and empty. The ridges are silent. The figure appears to those who find the box and wait, standing motionless for exactly 11 minutes before vanishing into absence. And those who stand on the ridge, where the figure should be, see nothing but feel everything. A presence without form, an observer without body, watching from a place that shifts with perspective, always where the watcher is not, always 11 minutes, and always vanishing, and always returning when the next visitor arrives and opens the box, and reads the entries, and looks up toward the ridge and sees, as everyone before them has seen, the figure that cannot be captured, only witnessed, standing in silence on the boundary between what is real and what insists on being seen.